David was going on a trip. His parents and Clark weren't particularly surprised. During the graduation break, many people chose to travel and unwind before university. To celebrate David and Clark finishing high school, their mother Martha had prepared a lavish dinner and invited relatives and friends. Pietro, Chloe, and Kira all attended. For the occasion, Jonathan had dragged the long, unused, extendable dining table out of the shed. After the cheerful banquet, everyone was in high spirits. The couple saw off relatives and friends. David and Clark waved their classmates goodbye. Moonlight lay over the town with a soft, silver glow. Later, in the familiar attic above the warehouse, Clark stood in front of the telescope looking pensive. "Lana didn't come tonight?" David asked, coming up the stairs with his hands in his pockets. Clark hadn't invited her, and she hadn't appeared at the dinner. "She's preparing to go to Paris for university." Clark leaned on his red and white striped cane, a faint loneliness in his voice. Life was full of imperfect plans. Things rarely went as hoped. He had liked Lana for years, and just as something might have begun between them, they were set to drift apart for college. "Since we'll be separated, I didn't want to interfere. It would only make things harder." Their relationship hadn't reached the level of a long-distance romance. Clark had secretly fantasized about attending the same school as Lana, but Metropolis was too close to home and Paris too far. David nodded. Lana had become a cheerleader early in high school, dated the football captain, and pursued a clear path. She wouldn't upend a carefully planned life for an uncertain romance. And Clark, a small-town boy who'd never left his state, couldn't just run off to another country. Ambiguity like that usually ends without much. David said lightly, "There'll be more chances at university." David offered the comfort, but Clark, wearing sunglasses, shook his head. When he'd been sighted and inconspicuous on campus, he hadn't been popular with girls. Now that he was blind, it felt even less likely. "Someone always knows how to find gold in the sand," David added with a half-smile. Clark looked surprised to be assessed that way by his brother and scratched at his jaw. Aside from some odd alien things, I don't really have anything special," he admitted. He still felt guilty and awkward about how he'd handled a recent crisis, how close his identity had come to exposure, and how David had stepped in for him. That only made him feel incompetent. "Don't discount some of your better traits like your kindness," David said. "Kindness?" Clark frowned. David's face grew serious. "Not everyone who has the power to destroy the world can make someone in trouble feel safe for a moment, like they've seen hope. I couldn't do that. Neither could many people." Clark hesitated, biting his lip. "Have you ever wondered why I was sent to Earth? Do I have some terrible purpose?" His brows tightened. He replayed the destruction on the farm in his mind. If that fight had happened in town, how many people might have been hurt? Kara had called him Sagai, a prophecy about someone who would destroy the world. Miss Kardashian's vision had shifted after he frightened his parents. In the future, will David be on the side of justice, and will I be the one who makes everyone afraid? With the piece of red meteorite that had landed with him, he feared he could become a weapon of destruction. His hands tightened into fists. David put a hand on his shoulder and smiled wryly. "You're overthinking. Being blind gives your mind too much time to run." David couldn't confess he was just a refugee, an alien baby who had fled to Earth with no mission, so he said instead, "Don't brood on it. Get some sun. Maybe your eyes will surprise you." "I'm going to bed early. I'm leaving for my trip tomorrow," Clark said, changing the subject. "By the way, where are you headed?" Clark called down the stairs as David started down. It wasn't Gotham. Clark hoped they were avoiding that dark place. "Not sure. Probably somewhere near London," David answered. "Near London? Any particular place?" Clark sounded curious. "There's a place people say is like paradise." Outside, on the coast of a small island, the air smelled of salt. Blue-green water lapped white sand, and a keen sea breeze carried the sharp tang of the ocean. On a scattered stretch of black rock, a young man with a lean, athletic build, dressed in casual beach clothes and looking like a vacationer, stood staring at the sky. Fog had risen from the sea and clouded his view. "It took 2 days, but I finally found it," he murmured. He'd tracked down the island after reading that. When Steve Trevor's plane went down and he and Wonder Woman left the island in a wooden boat, they reached London in a single night. If that was true, Paradise Island had to lie in the sea near Britain. David had searched the Atlantic and the North Sea off the coast of London. The weather here had been clear moments earlier, but as he approached at several times the speed of sound, the sky seemed to sense him and changed abruptly. The wind roared. Dense fog rolled in, swallowing direction. Dark clouds writhed with streaks of light like electric serpents. Any sailors arriving by boat would have thought a storm was coming and turned back. It only confirmed to David that he was close. The island was guarded. Zeus, god of thunder and sky, protected Paradise Island with a magical field that hid it and kept outsiders away, sheltering Queen Hippolyta and the Amazons. David stood at the water's edge. Then he shifted. Skin shimmering purple, he blurred into motion, running across the surface of the sea in a streak of violet lightning. His speed made the water beneath his feet hold like firm ground. The waves crashed behind him as he raced toward the island. On a cliff above the beach, Diana sat bored, legs dangling over the edge as she stared at the sea. Her mother had told her about the world beyond, a place of men and women who were not like the Amazons, less strong, less fierce. Paradise Island itself was a picture of beauty, an untainted sky of pure blue glass, air so clean every breeze felt new, jungles that grew lush and wild, and ancient stone palaces in classical style scattered among the mountains. Even the most exquisite painting would grow familiar after 1,000 years. There was nowhere on the island the Amazon princess hadn't seen, so novelty was rare. This was a pure place given to the Amazons by Zeus, untouched by Ares, god of war. Diana longed to leave and see the world, but Queen Hippolyta had forbidden any Amazon to go off the island lest they attract Ares' evil attention. Thousands of years of isolation had kept Diana's skin unlined, her features noble and heroic, her black curls like polished ebony. She carried a hint of girlish innocence in her bright eyes. To dispel the boredom, she tossed a pebble into the sea. The stone skipped and landed with a soft splash far below. Suddenly, a figure streaked across the water, crossing hundreds of meters in an instant and leaving a white wake behind him. He stepped onto the pristine white sand, paused, and swept a curious look over the shore. Paradise Island certainly lives up to its name. Arrogant. Arrogant. Passing through an invisible veil, David finally arrived at Paradise Island. The scenery truly lived up to its name. After the gloomy, storm-tossed seas beyond the barrier, the island felt like another world. Calm skies, the sea and horizon melting into a pure, impossible blue. A gentle breeze ruffled the air. Seagulls called as they wheeled gracefully in the sun. For a moment, it felt as if the tempest behind him had been nothing but a dream. A man? Diana, distracted, blinked and pushed herself up from the cliff. She stared in disbelief at the stranger who had just stepped onto the island. Bang! She had leaped down from a sea cliff dozens of meters high, landing on the beach like a cannonball. Her long, strong legs took the force of the fall and dissipated it, steady and unshaken. "Are you a man?" She examined David with the curiosity of someone seeing a strange creature for the first time. Short hair, a flat chest, an Adam's apple, rugged features, just like the men in the paintings. After thousands of years of monotonous calm, something new had finally intruded into her world. Curiosity from Diana 85. "Of course I'm a man." David, wearing a golden battle skirt, a star-spangled tiara around his head, and a golden rope at his waist, gave a small, surprised smile. He hadn't expected the first Amazon he met on Paradise Island to be Wonder Woman herself. He had even half assumed she might have left the island already because of the time ripples he'd caused. Is that so rare? No, there are lots of men, just none on Paradise Island. Diana's eyes shone. How did you get in? Could it be, like Mother sometimes worries at night when she looks out over the sea, that after thousands of years King Zeus's power is waning and the magic barrier won't hold much longer? She scanned him again, her gaze lingering on his Adam's apple and face, mumbling excitedly. "Men are more handsome than they look in the paintings, but why don't you have a beard?" David bristled a little at the naive question. Beardlessness could be misread here, and shrugged. "I'm not old enough yet." "How old are you? 3,000? Diana asked, curiosity bright in her face. Amazons were effectively immortal. Lifespans here stretched beyond Luthorian legends. "He constantly bathes in the Lazarus pit and ends up twisted, but everyone here lives forever. David's eyes flashed with a strange amusement. Diana was, after all, the daughter of Zeus and the Amazonian queen. Thousands of years would mean less to her than to mortal men. An immortal race, what a resource. If he could subdue them, the island could supply him with what he wanted forever. He let a faint smile curl his lips. An immortal race, how wonderful. Wait, he asked casually, a wicked edge in his gaze. Can you run on the surface of the sea? For reasons he couldn't name, Diana felt a prickle of unease. Like a startled leopard, she stepped back and assumed a fighting stance. Mother has always warned the tribe about the barrier weakening and Ares finding us. Are you Ares? Her mind supplied a quick, logical answer. David studied the innocent, unspoiled look in her eyes and couldn't help the brief silence that followed. Diana, stay away from him. The thunder of hooves announced Hippolyta's approach. Riding a magnificent warhorse at the head of 100 Amazon warriors, the queen cut an imposing figure. She had sensed a disturbance in the barrier. Someone had entered Paradise Island, and the response of that magic had been strong. This was no accidental wanderer. Drawing up before the cliff, Hippolyta's face hardened when she saw her daughter only a few meters from the stranger. Archers ready. A line of bowstrings scraped as skilled Amazons raised their bows. Arrows gleamed, aimed straight at David. Dust and clattering hooves marked the arrival of more stern-faced warriors. Outsider, identify yourself. Hippolyta drew her sword, her glare a hostile, white-hot thing. The chance this visitor had stumbled in by accident was too slim. She feared he might be Ares' vanguard. Whoosh! 2 arrows thudded into the sand at David's feet like a warning. He glanced at them, unimpressed, as if they were nothing more than sticks. Vigilance from Hippolyta plus 10.1, hostility plus 5.1, vigilance from Antiope 6.5, vigilance from Creta 2.2. Emotional updates cascaded so fast, David could barely keep track. The vigor and anger these Amazons offered already outstripped what Clark had provided in his most intense moments. He allowed himself a private, satisfied thought. I arrived at the right time. Not all Amazons had yet assembled. Diana flicked the lasso of truth at her waist, the golden rope whistling through the air as she lashed it toward David, intending to bind him and help her mother control the intruder. Is this the lasso of truth? In a blink, David snatched the rope. The golden lasso wrapped around his arm, and he turned it over with casual curiosity. The lasso of truth, said to be forged by Hephaestus from Gaia's golden girdle, was indestructible and compelled anyone bound by it to speak the truth. Diana had meant to loop it around his waist and bind his hands. Instead, her lasso landed in his grip. Shock flickered across her noble face. No one on the island has ever kept up with me since I was a child, not even my mother. Outsider, who are you? Hippolyta demanded, seizing the chance while he touched the lasso. What business do you have here? Diana pulled with all her might, trying to drag him down. But no matter how hard she fought, he wouldn't budge. The lasso felt wrapped around a mountain. The compulsion to speak the truth crept over him, irresistible to most, but David was used to managing odd effects. He looked at Diana, then with a quick flick threw the rope aside. His eyes found Hippolyta on the cliff, seemingly ignoring the hundreds of bows trained on him. He smiled, casual and cold. Hippolyta expected him to be unable to resist the lasso and reveal his identity, and she braced for uselessness. You only need to know that I am here to conquer you, Amazonians. The words dropped into the perfect, stunned silence that followed. Then something snapped. Emotional points flooded the system in an instant, surging higher than before. Hostility from 1,000 furious Amazons rose like the tide. Arrogant, kill him! Chapter 83. Is he a monster? David's offhand remark about conquering the Amazon tribe ignited fury among the warriors. You have no idea what you're up against, Hippolyta snarled, pointing her long sword, her face a mask of rage. Longbows were drawn in unison, a shriek of string, and thousands of sharp arrows filled the sky, arcing toward David. Diana hesitated for only a heartbeat, then flipped away with the lithe grace of a wildcat, landing clear of the arrow storm. In thousands of years, she had seen few outsiders, never a man who spoke to her people with such insolence, and the insult slashed as deep as any blade. The arrows screamed through the air, each one carrying enough force to turn a steel statue into a sieve. David, however, stood perfectly still. The volleys struck him and bounced off his clothes as if they were nothing. The fierce projectiles that could drive through copper and iron impotently shed their speed, drifting to the ground like feathers. As an immortal divine people, your arrows hit me like raindrops, David said coolly. At least rain can wet my clothes. One by one, the arrows fell at his feet until they formed a growing heap. Surprise flickered across Diana's face. Even as Amazon princess, stronger than most of her people, she would have been overwhelmed by such a hail. Yet this man had taken it in stride. Worse, he seemed to know something of the tribe's nature. I told you, you only need to know one thing, David added, repeating himself with a faint smile. He had come to Paradise Island for a single reason, to harvest emotion points. There were two ways to obtain what he wanted: positive emotions like gratitude and reverence, or negative ones like hatred and resentment. Reverence fades quickly, he said softly. Hatred and resentment can consume someone. They linger, gnawing at the mind and body until nothing else matters. That was why he preferred to provoke pain rather than inspire comfort. But he would not be wantonly cruel to the Amazons. Then he said the one word that set every heart wild: kill. Hippolyta's roar echoed down the cliff. At her command, hundreds of Amazons seized ropes and swung down the face of the precipice, swords flashing as they charged the intruder. Diana cinched the lasso of truth at her hip and strapped on the bracelets of submission. With a warrior's calm and a goddess's fury, she leapt into the fray. "You will not harm my people," she hissed. They crashed into him like a tide. David leaned back, slipping past Diana's fist, then through one of his own. The impact blew the ground apart. Fist-sized fragments of stone flew like shrapnel. The charging Amazons were knocked off their feet and slammed against the cliff, some thrown clear from their horses, others falling unconscious with bloodied heads. "Who are you?" A warrior shouted, stunned. Hippolyta's eyes narrowed as she pulled hard on her horse's reins, reining in the panic. The Amazons had been fashioned by the Greek gods, born from the souls of women wronged and blended with clay and divine power. They were a people able to bend steel with their hands. No mortal should shrug off a full-force arrow storm so casually. David's expression never changed. "There are two choices," he told them simply. "You can give me positive emotions, or negative ones." The arrow storm resumed, and David raised a finger to point. A concentrated beam of cosmic energy lanced from his fingertip, shredding the cliff's edge. Rocks exploded outward like grenades. The Amazon archers were thrown into disarray. Many were hurled off balance, knocked unconscious, or slammed backward by the blast. "What are you?" Hippolyta demanded. Diana sprang forward, her fists a blur. She was blindingly fast, faster than a bullet seemed, much swifter than David in pure speed. Their blows met with a thunderous crash, and the white sand under their feet exploded into waves, surging over 10 meters high. Diana fought with the ferocity of a battle goddess, her face unreadable, every move owned by centuries. David's power, though, grew with each exchange. Where Diana struck like a storm, his counters came down like meteors. He absorbed the kinetic energy of the Amazons' swinging swords, sending attackers flying with a single backhand. One by one, the warriors were knocked unconscious or thrown against the rock face, breaking bone and tendon. Hippolyta watched in growing alarm as her people fell. Each Amazon who tried to aid the princess was driven back faster than they advanced. Diana found herself forced back again and again, astonishment flickering in her eyes. The man's strength seemed to swell with every blow. "Is he a monster?" she wondered, both horrified and exhilarated. The thrill of combat lit Diana's features. "You are a worthy foe," she admitted through gritted teeth. "Since I came of age, I haven't had a fight like this." If she could best him, she would beg her mother for mercy. She raised the bracelets of submission to take more of his force, deflecting powerful blows. David's face darkened with a dangerous amusement. He shoved her down with a crushing strike, the power of it bending the very ground. Diana dropped to her knees. "When I defeat you," he said coldly, "you and your mother will kneel before my throne, just like this." "You're arrogant," Diana snapped, anger flaring in her eyes as she hauled herself up, but no sooner had she risen than another strike blasted her backward. Purple energy ripples pulsed from David. His eyes flared with a piercing violet light, as though a god had stepped into the world. Each subsequent attack was more fearsome than the last. mountain-splitting, sea-roaring force that battered Diana despite her bracelets. If not for the bracelets of submission absorbing and dispersing part of the energy, she would have been crushed long before. Each time he struck, a portion of his power seemed to dissipate against those enchanted bands. David's frown deepened as he seized Diana's attacking arm and fixed his gaze on her wrist. "Bracelets of submission," he murmured, recognition plain in his voice. The bracelets of submission, forged by Hephaestus, god of fire, from fragments of the Aegis, Zeus's shield. They automatically draw in incoming attacks, protect the wearer from arrows and stray bullets, render them invulnerable to blades and spears, and possess divine defensive power. David smiled with a hint of admiration. As Zeus's daughter, Diana was a second-generation god and wore divine artifacts. She struggled, but the bracelets held fast. She threw another punch. It was caught. She gritted her teeth, gathered her strength, and tried to break the grip, but she didn't budge. Both her hands felt clamped in iron tongues. "Release the princess," a tall Amazon warrior barked. Serious-faced and authoritative, she moved like a charging cannonball from dozens of meters away, sword raised high to cleave mountains. She slashed at David. With both hands occupied, purple rays shot from David's eyes. The heat singed the air with a buzzing sizzle, and a blast of force sent the general flying. She tumbled 100 meters like a broken kite. Her sword slipped from her grasp. Her chest and abdomen armor were scorched and pierced. Antiope. Seeing Antiope, the teacher who had trained her in swordsmanship since childhood, wounded, Diana's face tightened. She lowered her head and rammed it against David's. Bang! A white concentric airwave exploded between them. It was like striking a wall. Diana staggered back, dazed. In that instant, one of the bracelets of submission slipped from her arm. David, whose head hadn't even tilted, toyed with the bracelet twice and casually tossed it aside. The silver band struck the nearby cliff and embedded itself like a meteor. With only one bracelet left, Diana's expression changed. When both bracelets of submission were used together, they could unleash an attack capable of splitting mountains, one of her most powerful moves. She had hoped to use it, but she never got the chance. One bracelet had already been taken. David waved his hand and blasted a wave that scattered the approaching Amazons. He moved in and threw a punch toward Diana's forehead, aiming to knock out the most troublesome opponent first. Diana raised her arm to block. Under the terrifying force, she grunted. Her arm felt as if it had been struck by a sledgehammer. A razor-sharp longsword whistled through the air. As David flicked his hand to send the blade away, Diana pushed off the sand, straining to break free and fall back. Around them, her tribeswomen surged forward and were swept aside like autumn leaves. Paradise Island is watched over by the gods. It is not a place for your lawlessness, outsider, Hippolyta cried. The queen had hurled her sword and leaped down a 100-meter cliff in a single powerful bound. Agile and fierce, her face was cold as frost. She attacked David with strikes from unpredictable angles. Unlike Diana, who still lacked battlefield experience, Hippolyta had fought at the side of gods in the Age of Olympus. She had clashed with invaders from beyond the heavens. Her blows were honed in blood and fire and nearly flawless, but their strengths did not match. David, as if sparring with a frail old woman, calmly dodged her twice, ignored a few blows, and then swept her aside with a gesture. He smiled as he said, "If the gods truly watched this, I'd be even more delighted." Hippolyta's status as Zeus's lover and Diana's status as his daughter should have drawn the gods' attention, but David detected no reaction from them. Bang! "Mother!" Diana cried as she caught her mother, who staggered back with blood at the corner of her mouth. Diana grabbed the lasso of truth from her waist with both hands, stance low and determined like a gunslinger in a duel. Only the lasso might have a chance to control him now. "Kill!" The Amazon warriors roared and charged again. David spread his palm and clenched. The air itself seemed crushed. A spherical ripple of energy radiated from him, sweeping hundreds of meters in an instant. The remaining 1,000-plus warriors were thrown like insects. They slammed into the rock and fell unconscious in a scatter of dull cracks. Diana shielded her mother. The blast hit them like a typhoon and forced her eyes shut. When the wave passed, a tall figure had already appeared within arm's reach. There was no time to act. Diana opened her eyes to see a punch land, her injured arm dropping. the lasso of truth was ripped from her grasp. David followed with an energy blast to her abdomen that sent her flying. Before she could tumble far, the lasso, a divine artifact that moved to his will, extended like a golden bolt and bound her midair. He yanked, and Diana, helpless as a bird on a leash, flew back to his feet and collapsed onto the beach, completely bound by the lasso. "Daughter," Hippolyta's eyes went bloodshot with fury and fear, and she pushed to her feet to strike. David raised a hand and fired another blast. She crumpled, unconscious. On the beach, thousands of towering warriors lay outstretched beneath the bright sun. David stood holding the lasso. At one end was Diana, still bound and prone. He looked up at the sky. Template integration. Before arriving at Paradise Island, it had been 60%. A single battle had raised it by 1%. This was the new path of steady progress. "But the main point is next," he muttered. In the heart of Paradise Island, inside the great, ancient royal palace, a man sat where only the Amazon Queen should sit. Around him lay defeated Amazon warriors, battered and glaring. Hippolyta stood below with her generals and tribeswomen, trembling with rage but not daring to step forward. "Are you all very displeased?" David asked, lounging on the throne with one hand propped under his chin, watching the humiliated crowd. They had reason to be. Diana's dark hair fell loose, her face looked fragile and bruised. She could not sit upright, bound by the lasso, and leaned weakly against the throne beside him, glaring at the intruder. In David's other hand, he casually held Hippolyta's gleaming sword, using it to bar her path. If Diana moved even slightly, her body would strike the blade. The threat was clear. "What do you want, outsider?" Hippolyta demanded, pressing her fury down because her daughter was in enemy hands. "It's simple. Submit to me," David said. "You are deluded. The Amazon tribe can be destroyed, but it will never be conquered." Antiope shouted, and the warriors below echoed her defiance. Their anger was fierce, but it could not undo their defeat. "Is that so?" David asked coolly. "But as I recall, how was the Amazon tribe once conquered by outsiders?" Hippolyta's face blanched. The most humiliating secret of the Amazon past, brought up by an outsider, showed on her features. 85. The Great Deeds Beyond the 12 Labors. Diana's eyes flashed with surprise as she looked at her mother. When had their Amazon tribe ever been conquered? Why had she never heard of it? Hippolyta's face showed a flash of anger, as if a painful secret had been exposed. "That was thousands of years ago, a disgrace to the Amazons. How could you know about it?" She stared at David, sensing an unsettling mystery about him. He not only possessed near-divine strength, he also knew things long thought lost. "It's ancient history," David said slowly. "Heracles, the great hero of Greece, son of Zeus, was mocked for this. Though his strength could shake mountains, people said he could never conquer the women of Paradise Island." From the throne, David calmly told the humiliating tale the Amazons had tried to bury. He led his men here intending to conquer the island, but the Amazon Queen, wielding a magic girdle given by Aphrodite, goddess of love, defeated him. "Enough," Hippolyta cut in, as if trying to smother the memory. "That was the work of Ares, the god of war." David ignored her interruption. Many of the younger Amazons looked stunned. They had never heard this history. He wanted them to understand that their proud cry of being unconquerable was not the whole truth. Unfortunately, the queen who defeated Heracles was later deceived. He stole her girdle, and without it she lost her power. The Amazons were taken, enslaved by Heracles. David lingered over the word deceived, and Hippolyta's face flickered with an expression that was neither anger nor shame alone. To call it conquered was almost polite. The truth was slavery. "So don't pretend you'd rather die than surrender," David added coldly. "If the goddess's girdle were still in my hands—" Hippolyta ground her teeth, clenching her fists as she glared at him. "You would never be sitting on my throne today, outsider." The girdle had once given her strength comparable to a god. Even Heracles, before his apotheosis, had been soundly bested by the Amazon Queen. Yet David merely shrugged. Losers always have an excuse. He moved on, almost conversationally. "Leaving aside whether the girdle would have been enough to defeat me, the girdle is gone. Let me guess, she was taken by a man, and the goddess reclaimed it." He let the implication hang in the air. To take a woman's girdle was rarely a simple trick. The loss had enraged Aphrodite. The goddess had at first looked away, But when Hippolyta begged on behalf of her people, Aphrodite relented and helped drive Heracles off the island. Still, the shame remained. The Amazons began wearing bracelets as a mark and a reminder, never to forget the time they had been slaves and always to be wary of outsiders and men. You want my people to bow before others again? Never. Hippolyta's voice rang through the hall. The past was an open wound she would not let be used against her. Facing an outsider who spoke of conquest, she felt no gratitude, only the need to protect her daughter and her people. It is because of history's lessons that we know losing our freedom is worse than death. Her defiance rallied the warriors. Mentioning the gods steadied them. If they died, they might return to the gods' embrace. The Amazons shouted in unison, burning with renewed pride. You may kill our bodies, outsider, but you will never take our dignity. David applauded, amused. He knew the Amazons' reputation. In the legends, Paradise Island had been sacked and massacred many times, yet it never truly submitted to outsiders. Then it seems I must find an uninhabited paradise for my collection, he said dryly. He rose, lifting a long sword. The blade gleamed and his face turned cold. He ran his finger along the edge, a simple gesture that sent a ripple of fear through the hall. The warriors took a step back, as if confronted by a monster. Don't you dare harm my people, Wonder Woman hissed, struggling. The lasso of truth had bound her, coiling her limbs and sapping her strength like kryptonite. She managed only to stagger toward him. David flicked the sword casually. Diana, just regaining her balance, stumbled and fell back onto the throne. He smiled without warmth. Perhaps I will keep you, Princess of the Amazons, as my trophy, proof I destroyed the legendary tribe. He paused and addressed the assembly. The Amazon Queen's face tightened, as if facing some mythic terror. Any last words? David asked, leaning on his sword as if slaughtering them all would be no challenge. Hippolyta steadied herself, and the warriors around her braced like drums about to roll. Outsider, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Heracles completed the 12 labors and became a world-renowned hero. Warriors followed him and died for him. If you can achieve a greater feat than Heracles, our tribe will submit to you. The words came out of her as much a bargain as a declaration. The age of gods had passed. She could not be certain the souls of her people would return to the gods. They had lived free on Paradise Island and feared what submission might mean, servitude rather than freedom. Still, for the safety of her people, she made the offer. David raised an eyebrow. What feat surpassing the 12 labors do you mean? He sneered inwardly. Destroying the Amazons offered him no real benefit. It would make enemies and leave a burned, vengeful people. Killing them would only invite endless trouble. The best way, he thought, is to conquer them so thoroughly that they resent it, but are helpless and under my rule forever. A strange light passed through his eyes. Hippolyta felt as if she'd been slapped. One moment she had sworn death over surrender. The next she had put the tribe's fate on the line in a bargain she could scarcely believe. For the sake of her daughter and her people, she had no choice. Diana heard her mother's words and frowned, surprised and troubled. Chapter 86, Kill the Eldest Son of Heavenly Father. Diana had known of Heracles since childhood, one of Zeus's most famous sons by a mortal, a legendary hero among men. But she had never heard of the 12 labors. It's normal your mother didn't tell you, David said with a chuckle. One of the labors was to take her magic girdle. A mother doesn't go around telling her daughter about embarrassing failures, and besides what? Hippolyta glanced at the young man on the dais, a playful look in her eyes, and Diana felt her heart skip. A flicker of panic crossed the queen's face. Could he know? Something else? Impossible. Only the gods knew that. Diana's questions pressed, but David only smiled and said nothing. If Hippolyta had explained the myth, Diana would have asked how Heracles had bested her mother, details that would be hard to hear. Diana is the daughter of Zeus and Hippolyta, and Heracles is Zeus's son, David said lightly. But Heracles once almost captured Hippolyta, before Zeus. When the truth of her origins came, Diana suspected her perfect image of her mother would fracture. Then again, David continued, shrugging, that's just the way the Greek gods are. He listed Heracles' feats offhandedly, skinning the invulnerable Nemean lion, slaying the many-headed hydra, capturing the Ceryneian hind, seizing the mighty Erymanthian boar. and finally, bringing Cerberus up from the underworld. Diana's astonishment deepened as the names piled up. These were monsters from the stories she'd grown up on, terrifying even to think about. Cerberus, Hades' guardian beast, how could any mortal, let alone a demigod, bring him back? Her gaze, full of unease, moved to her mother. Now she understood Hippolyta's change of tone. What could top all those labors? Outsider, Hippolyta said, her voice ringing through the hall. You need not face many trials. Only one feat is required, and we will crown you our king. Every Amazon looked up. Kill Ares, the queen declared. Ares, the god of war, who still roams the world. The word fell like thunder. The Amazon warriors flinched. Fear flashed in their eyes. For a long moment, the hall was pinned under a weight of silence, as if merely naming him might draw his attention. Ares, Ares who slew the gods, even Father Zeus, Diana blurted, heart hammering. The Amazons had always revered the gods of Olympus, Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, and more. To think one being had slaughtered them all, what did that say of the god of war? The legends told of Ares as rebellion and massacre incarnate, bloodlust made god, a symbol of chaos and the ruin of men. If I remove Ares from this world, David asked calmly, disregarding the trembling faces around him, will the Amazon tribe accept me? He pronounced Ares' name as though discussing any ordinary opponent. To him, killing the god of war sounded like a matter of course. Diana couldn't help but note that his tone matched the hero's courage she had admired since childhood, the steady confidence that faces anything, no matter how fearsome. Bound by the lasso of truth, she sensed the truth in his demeanor. He was not lying. Hippolyta's expression tightened. She had reigned for millennia and was not easily surprised. You know secrets mortals shouldn't, she said, suspicion in her voice. But have you heard of Ares' terror? Strength and fear are relative, David replied simply. Ares might be terrifying to you, but not to me. Hippolyta's jaw set. Amazons held honesty sacred. Lying was cowardly, ignoble, a disgrace. Amazons abhor lies, she declared, voice firm. Our promises bind us until death. Very good, David said, slow and pleased. I hope you keep that promise. Otherwise, finding only an empty island would be too boring. His gaze swept the hall, icy and unreadable. The assembled Amazons stiffened. They knew his current power didn't match Zeus, but they also remembered legends from ages when Ares' might had been untouchable. In times of war, his power swelled. Battle fed him. There were older wars, wars that pushed gods beyond all measure. In ancient days, when Darkseid led Apocalypse armies against Earth, the conflict touched humans, gods, Green Lanterns, Atlanteans. Ares' strength surged beyond imagining, David said, eyes turning to the sky beyond the hall, as if seeing the past played out. Zeus himself once handed him his axe in that war. Ares donned his helmet and fought like the very center of the storm. He almost split Darkseid in two. The Dark Lord was but 8 then, yet the feat rocked the world. When Ares' power had peaked, he may have used that surge to strike against his family, slaughtering gods and forcing them back to Olympus for rebirth, until he remained the only Greek god on Earth. His deeds were dreadfully glorious. But that was then, David murmured. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. Wars are rare now. Ares is long past that apex. Even his ordinary strength today would be far below his ancient peak, and locating him, well, that part was easier to guess. He looked toward a distant horizon, and in his vision the god of war strode amid battles strewn with corpses, listening to the roar of guns and cannons, as if it were the finest symphony drunk on the scent of blood. The god of war is where war is, David said flatly. 87. 6 Demons in Regret, 3K4. Inside a fortress of poured concrete and steel, a long-haired man with unmistakably Egyptian features stood with a glass of red wine and looked out over his base, patrolled constantly by soldiers. In the span of a year, Ismail's life had been transformed. Where once he and his men had to hide and evade capture, he was now the de facto ruler of Kahndaq. All of it had been made possible by one person, but Ismail was not happy. His brow was locked in a frown. Footsteps approached from behind. An old man, his face aged but still imperious, leaning on an elegant cane, came up slowly. He moved like a monarch through his own palace as he faced the warlord who controlled a nation from within a fortified base. "Troubled by your country?" the old man asked. "Your Eminence." Ismail heard the voice, then turned and bowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Shouldn't you be at Kowak's celebration banquet, toasting the victory over Kondak and the capture of tens of thousands of square kilometers? The man before him was the one power behind the Kowak warlord, the reason Kowak and Kondak had been set against each other so fiercely. I dislike mortal banquets, the old man said. His smile was scornful. Noise of clinking glasses, endless calculations, filth, darkness, and violence buried in their hearts, all masked by false elegance. Their hypocrisy sickens me. You've attended the feasts of the Olympian gods. Our mortal celebrations are not worthy of your attention, Ismail replied, bowing. His shirt lay open at the chest, revealing a hideous scar, one corner of a five-pointed star cut into his flesh. Olympus. At the name, the old man sneered. Mockery flashed in his eyes. Your Eminence, I wonder where you found my ancestor's crown. Ismail hesitated, then said, I searched for it before, but never found it. You do not need to know. That place offers you nothing. The old man, Ares, glanced at him. He had only casually provoked two nations into war. This small country between the Middle East and Egypt had been unexpectedly interesting. When he, as usual, sought a petty warlord to prop up and discovered Ismail, he had detected the scent of magic and demonic blood in his lineage. Is it because Black Adam is sealed there? Hatred flared in Ismail's eyes. He clenched his fists. Thousands of years ago, my ancestor, King Acton, ruled this kingdom. If not for Black Adam, our family would have kept this land long ago. His ancestor had fashioned a crown and forged a pact with the 6 great demons of hell. Their line should have ruled the kingdom forever. Black Adam had destroyed that. Ares waved away the thought. Don't imagine that, because you have a pact with 6 demons, you can defeat that mortal the annoying wizards chose. He sneered, warning implicit in the words. You wield the power of 6 demons of hell, and he possesses the attributes of 6 Egyptian gods. How do demons compare to gods? Even a mortal who has mastered part of a god's power is not the same as a demon. Ares did not care whether Ismail, propped up by him, treated Kondak as his own. He had no interest in ruling a mortal nation. He loved war, for entertainment, for the chance to feed on conflict and remember his former strength. Kondak and Kowak were merely toys, like lions and tigers in a coliseum. You are right, Your Eminence, Ismail said. Feeling the displeasure of this ancient god, the god of war, whose name had been sung since time immemorial, Ismail trembled and lowered his head. He knew Ares feared that releasing Black Adam would first destroy Ares' own forces and then drive off Kowak, ending the war and spoiling his amusement. Soon, Ismail promised, I will let your Kondak win once. Gracious of you, Ares replied. Under the bright moon, the sea turned to scattered silver and the waves whispered softly. But it would be a sleepless night for many Amazons. From a lookout above the sea at the palace on Paradise Island, Hippolyta paced, brow knit with worry. She had her attendants bring out 2 long-guarded treasures. First came a dark gold disc. This round shield is called the Shield of Power. Diana took the heavy shield. Her fingers skimmed the classical patterns on its face, rays like a blooming sun. It was magnificent, austere. Although it wasn't made by the god of fire, it's of the same material as your bracelets of submission, crafted from god metal. Hippolyta explained, it is indestructible and can defend you against attacks from gods. The weapons of the gods were forged from god metal. This shield was truly a divine artifact. Earlier that day, Hippolyta had proposed an extraordinary bargain to David. If he could accomplish an unparalleled feat, slay Ares, the god of war, the Amazon tribe would honor David as their king, as they honored the gods. She wanted her daughter to accompany David. When a god is killed, its divine body dissipates into the world and should not be desecrated by mortals. My daughter, the Amazon princess, must witness the slaying. For the tribe to accept any claim of Ares' death, the princess herself had to be the witness. Hippolyta's touch softened as she caressed Diana's face under the moonlight. Diana had never left the island. She had lived sheltered, never tested in true battle. Her first time off the island, Hippolyta thought, and she must face the terrible Ares. Worse, she would travel with a powerful man whose ambitions were dubious. As a mother, Hippolyta wished she could go in Diana's place, but she lacked the strength. Diana touched the shield and showed no fear. Her fighting spirit was high. Moonlight carved her into the image of a warrior goddess in white jade. Pray for me, mother, she said. I will return to Paradise Island with honor." Hippolyta sighed and presented the second prize, a beautiful divine sword. Diana had seen it only once before, kept in a tall treasury tower no one could approach. She reached out, unable to resist the cold, hard blade. "It's called the God-Killer sword." Two dragons formed the crossguard. The blade was thin and etched with ancient patterns, so sharp it could cut hair in the air and slice iron like clay. "A masterpiece from Hephaestus, the god of fire," Hippolyta said. "It can cleave through everything in the world." "Everything?" Diana asked, thinking of the man resting in their palace, of all the attempts that had failed to hurt him. Could this sword breach his defenses? "It can help you slay Ares." "But isn't slaying Ares the trial that man, David, must face?" Diana swung the sword twice in the courtyard, the blade whistling through the air. Earlier, he had declared his name to the Amazons and acted as if their island were already his. That arrogance had unsettled them. Hippolyta dismissed the others and stayed with her daughter. "Diana, only another god can kill a god. Even if kill simply meant banish a god from the world, only another god could do it. Although that outsider is powerful, almost godlike, he lacks a god's aura. He is not one of the gods of any civilization on this planet." "So he is doomed to fail?" Diana asked. Hippolyta grimaced. "Yes." She explained the plan. The intruder will exhaust part of Ares' power and then be killed by Ares. After that, Diana, the Amazon princess, would complete the great feat and slay the god of war. Diana protested. Hadn't her mother just said only a god can kill a god? Hippolyta hesitated, then smiled with a secretive pride. "This sword is an exception," she said. "Zeus gifted it to our tribe. It is called God-Killer for a reason. Zeus meant it to be used by the Amazon's strongest warrior to fell the evil god of war." Dawn came. David had spent the night in the Amazon palace and woke to find the tribe had not tried to kill him in his sleep. He smiled faintly. Were they disdainful or simply confident of victory? On the shore, Diana emerged in full battle regalia, a winged crown, battle skirt, boots, a sword strapped to her back, and shield of power in hand. She looked every inch a goddess of war, and heads turned as Amazons and outsiders alike watched her, their admiration and apprehension visible. Hermes' winged sandals gleamed at her heels. In one night she had 3 divine artifacts. David glanced with interest at the God-Killer sword. It was a divine weapon capable of cutting at the most fundamental levels, powerful enough that even a Kryptonian could not treat it with indifference. Diana had once used it to sever Doomsday's arm with a single sweep. Standing by the water, David looked relaxed in the sunlight, handsome like the sun god Apollo, and Diana felt a complicated stir in her chest. Her mother had told her everything. The man thought he had a chance to conquer the Amazons, but Hippolyta had already arranged the outcome. Still, as she looked at her mother and the watching tribe, the scene felt eerily familiar, like the old epics, despotic kings assigning impossible labors, the 12 labors of Heracles, Jason and the Golden Fleece, Perseus and Medusa, heroes sent to die. Those tales always assumed the hero would never return. Diana found herself pitying David. He did not know he had walked into a trap or that destiny weighed against him. As a mortal, he cannot slay a god, she thought. Yet a restlessness tugged at her. Perhaps this time, the ending might be different. Author's note: I'll post a bit less today. I'll make up for it this afternoon or tomorrow. I've had a serious illness in my family recently, and I'm exhausted both physically and mentally. Purple Sweet Potato will keep the basic daily update of 4,000 words. If I can, I'll aim for 4,000 to 5,000. More than that is difficult for now. I hope everyone will forgive me. The Middle East was the most war-torn region on this planet. Kandak's civil war had raged for years. When a new power finally seized control and put an end to the chaos, it immediately went to war with neighboring Kowak. A year later, the two countries were mired in a quagmire. Locked in a brutal, ongoing tug-of-war, neither could escape. In Kandak's capital, the streets were full of people with sunken eyes and weary faces, moving quickly under the weight of constant tension. Soldiers patrolled the avenues, a suffocating atmosphere hung over everything. David and Diana walked calmly through the market, and the contrast made them stick out. Their good looks and composed manner were almost indecent in such a place, and Diana's ancient warrior garb drew even more stares. Have clothes outside always been like this? Diana asked, puzzled. She found modern dress odd, sleeves that reached the legs, collars tight around the throat. Aren't they uncomfortable? David shrugged. What looks odd to a goat looks odd to a donkey. Kahndaq's cities were backward compared with modern metropolises, but they retained a lot of their original flavor and ancient ruins. Stacked stone buildings everywhere. If it had been a concrete jungle, Diana would feel even more out of place. Is Ares in this country? She pressed. Since leaving Paradise Island, David had brought her straight across the ocean to Kahndaq, as if he had a target in mind. Not necessarily here, but very likely. David spoke plainly. Ares likes to prop up a weak nation to fight a stronger one, or set two weak nations against each other. He treats human lives like cards in a game, keeping them evenly matched so the war goes on and on. He draws power from the suffering. If he isn't in Kahndaq, he's in Kowak. David explained how the civil war had suddenly ended, and a warlord had consolidated control in Kahndaq within a year. Across the border, a poor country suddenly received huge sums of money and arms. Weapons arrived as if they were free, and it quickly became a fighting power. Small border skirmishes had turned into a full-scale war that dragged on day after day. The cost was staggering, over 100,000 soldiers dead so far. There's an invisible hand pulling the strings, he said. Diana's eyes narrowed. You're not that blind. David nodded. He'd been following the news on the two countries because Kahndaq was Black Adam's homeland. When Ares was mentioned, he immediately suspected interference. Diana's face darkened with hatred. Her mother had told her that Zeus had left the god-killer's sword for the Amazon tribe's strongest warrior to kill Ares. She would not fail the mission the divine sword demanded. The wicked god of war must be stopped, she said, clenching her fists. David glanced at the god-killer sword on her back. He remembered stories in the comics. When Diana had once stabbed Ares, the blade, like ash given form, had disintegrated at his touch. Even their famed Amazonian shield shouldn't be that fragile. He wondered how Ares had managed that. They passed through the city center, where the ruins of an ancient royal palace marked the spot, and headed toward the military headquarters outside the town, Ismail's base. As they left the crowded lanes, an ice cream truck caught Diana's eye. Children in this war-torn city bought colorful cold treats, and after a bite, smiled genuinely. Ice cream, Diana breathed. David smiled and shook his head. Someone who'd been isolated for millennia had no common sense about modern life. 2 ice creams, please, he told the vendor, pulling out a note. He bought 1 vanilla and 1 chocolate and handed them to Diana. So sweet, she said. Zeus's daughter, the Amazon princess, walked between stalls, sword and shield on her back, 2 cones in her hands. She tasted each and lit up. Looking at the vendor with the solemnity of a queen praising a royal chef, she said, "You should be proud. This is fit for a king." The vendor was stunned, then removed his straw hat and bowed. People had praised his ice cream for being cheap before, but never like this. David watched with an odd expression. Wonder Woman liked ice cream, a lot. Even without knowing what it was, she had loved it immediately. They needed to find Ares' proxies first. Outside the heavily guarded base, Ismail's soldiers stopped them, dark muzzles trained on David and Diana, the men tense and on edge. "Don't come any closer," one barked. "Did you not see the warning signs?" They looked like tourists. Their features showed they were foreigners. "We suspect you're spies. Come with us." Approaching a foreign military base without permission was not a harmless mistake. A squad of soldiers moved to seize them. 2 of the men leered at Diana. "I don't like your eyes," she snapped. David was about to act, but Diana, still cheerful from the ice cream, snapped. She lashed out with her lasso of truth, hurling the squad into the air. "Attack! Alarm! Sound the alert!" someone shouted. Inside the fortified compound built into the hillside, soldiers had seen the commotion and opened fire. Diana drew the Amazon shield from her back and held it up. Bullets rang off the metal, clang, 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 showering the shield's surface. David stood sheltered behind her, not a single bullet finding him. "Shoot her legs," an officer barked. Hundreds of rounds poured out, though, an entire fusillade hitting the shield. The officer adjusted his cap and cursed. "Are you idiots? This isn't training. Don't treat her shield like a target." He gave the order to aim lower and fired at Diana's exposed legs, but every bullet, for some inexplicable reason, was drawn to the shield instead. The officer stared in disbelief, mouth open. "God, what's going on?" he cried. It was the divine power that guarded the silver bracelets, an automatic attractor of firepower that deflected arrows and stray bullets away from its wearer. Diana wore it now, shield in hand. With the power steadying her, every bullet that flew toward her struck the shield and went harmlessly aside. The fortress's defenses, however, did not end there. On the high courtyard walls, heavy machine guns swung into position, their thick muzzles trained on David and Diana. David simply pointed, and a purple energy beam lit the air. Each gun erupted, shredded into steel shrapnel that sprayed across the yard. David gestured again and again. One by one, the weapons on the ramparts disintegrated like brittle biscuits. Under the falling debris, the front courtyard became a meat grinder. Flesh and blood flew. Frontline soldiers were blown to pieces, smoke rising where they had stood. A few who survived crouched in corners, watching as lasers cut through men and masonry alike, terrified out of their minds. "Devil! Devil!" someone screamed. David frowned and flicked a finger. The shouting died down. Immediately, an alarm began to wail, ringing through the steel fortress carved into the mountain. Fully armed troops, rifles and cannons at the ready, poured out from within. Diana gave a soft cry and leapt into the fray. She cracked the lasso of truth like a whip. The golden rope flashed and sent a dozen attackers skidding through the air. She moved through the soldiers like a leopard, dodging bullets, lashing with the lasso. Enemy after enemy fell beneath her strikes. Still, the tide of soldiers kept coming, as if a river tried to be dammed. Inside a nearby office, Ismail pulled a pistol from a drawer and peered toward the courtyards, brows knitting. He couldn't casually call on the six gods' power. The war game that had granted him his position and abilities would be over if he did. Yet he watched men hurled dozens of meters as if struck by missiles, and there was no smoke, only a flash of gold. "Is that a rope?" he muttered. Ares was behind him without Ismail noticing, staring out the window with hard eyes. He recognized the artifact at a glance. "Your Eminence," he said. Ismail spun, surprised. "I can feel my father's aura. It seems to be my sister." Zeus and an Amazon had sired a demigoddess, an insurance policy from his scheming father, and now she had shown herself. Ares' eyes narrowed. For millennia, he had hunted for Paradise Island beneath Zeus's concealment and never found it. Now she had come, and she had brought a mortal. And the man with her seems unusual. Gunfire cracked sporadically. Soldiers tried to take shots. David's eyes glowed purple and terrifying lasers lanced out. A streak of death swept the yard. Human bodies, steel, concrete, everything sliced as if by a hot knife. Diana snagged an Eve with the lasso and leaped, but the laser struck the watchtower she held, and it collapsed in a shower of timbers. She dropped clear, pulling herself from the wall and brushing dust and brick from her arms as she faced the courtyard with the godkiller's sword in hand, her eyes bright with the thrill of meeting a powerful foe. Something massive appeared overhead. A dazzling fireball, like a meteor, whistled in from a distance. Diana stared, surprised. The blazing figure slammed into the ground a few hundred meters away, carving a deep crater. A blast of air scattered corpses like straw. Heat melted the earth into rivers of smoke and sulfur. From the smoke came a deep voice, monstrous and resonant. "You have great audacity to have killed all the soldiers in my base." As the steam and flame thinned, a towering figure stood revealed. Crimson-skinned, muscles wreathed in fire, eyes glowing red. Thick horns jutted back from a ferocious face, and a 5-pointed star was branded on his chest like a challenge. David's face registered recognition. He had expected someone with superhuman power to answer the slaughter, but not this. Sabak. With an explosive roar, Sabak launched himself at Diana. His force slammed into her shield and drove her bodily through the corner of a nearby house. She tore herself free of the wall, brushed bricks from her armor, and met him in the courtyard, sword at the ready. There was excitement in her gaze. Facing a demon thrilled her. Sabak's attention flicked to the ragged sword-shaped wound down his chest. Lava-red blood had oozed from a wound that should not have been possible, but it knitted closed before a drop fell to the ground. "Where did you get that sword?" he demanded. He had never been hurt since he gained his powers. This woman's speed had let her strike before he could raise his shield, and her blade had pierced him. If she was truly the sister of the god of war, then she was indeed the daughter of the Skyfather. No surprise, then, at her competence. Sabak weighed his options. He could leave her to Ares and deal with the other intruder, or he could finish this quickly. You can think of him as a powerful demon, comparable to a demon king, David said from where he stood, watching Sabak. Sabak's lips curled. As one of the archenemies of Black Adam and Shazam, he wielded the power of the 6 demon kings. SS, the power of Satan, the invulnerability of Aim, the wicked wisdom of Belial, the fire of Beelzebub, the evil courage of Asmodeus, and the flight of Kratos, David murmured, listing the names as he sized him up. Sabak was not to be underestimated. He might be on par with Ares in raw power. Fortunately for David, none of Sabak's known gifts prioritized speed. Sabak made his choice. He would take the easier opponent. Boy, you cost me a lot of soldiers. I will sink your soul in hell for eternity. With a roar of malice, Sabak slammed his thick demonic arm forward. Waves of hellfire, hot enough to vaporize steel, surged toward David like a tidal wall. Die! 90. Is he really a devil? Rolling flames turned everything to ash, the heat so fierce that even untouched ground melted into rivers of lava. David raised his palm and let the universe's energy surge outward like a tidal wave. Shabak's face hardened as the 2 titanic forces met and tore into each other. His inferno had no time to take full effect. The purple riptide sliced through the blaze like a spear, while the deep red conflagration still rolled forward, trying to engulf David. Boom. Shabak took a direct hit to the chest and was hurled backward more than 10 meters before he caught himself, clutching his ribs in sudden pain. A dark, bruise-like patch had begun to spread on his skin. Hundreds of meters of buildings and fortresses lay torn open. He had known the young man was strong, but he hadn't expected his energy output to be so much greater in practice. Coldly, Shabak looked up. Even steel alloy would have melted under his flames. The fire petered out. Behind David, a solid concrete wall gaped open in a monstrous hole, lava running down its edges. David stood there, unhurt. It's like swallowing grit, rough going to digest, he muttered. Since his template fusion passed 60%, absorbing thermal, electrical, and heat energies had become almost as easy as eating for David. He had even started to siphon off small amounts of magic and other mystical energies, though it wasn't very smooth yet. In the last exchange, he'd mostly been pushing energy outward to shield himself while trying to draw in a trace of the flames he'd deliberately let through. Shabak's fire, he thought. From the demon king Beelzebub, this is no ordinary flame. Shabak's eyes widened, his look turning ugly with shock. His supposedly indestructible body had been punctured, and flames that normally vaporize steel had been shrugged off. For a beat he hesitated, his gaze flicking over David like a viper weighing prey. Could this man be? Demigod? A god? Diana, all fighting spirit, didn't wait to speculate. She stomped, cracking the earth, and launched herself like a cannonball with shield foremost. Shabak slammed his palm against the shield to block. The impact shattered the ground beneath his feet and forced him to step back. Diana moved like a nimble butterfly, graceful and lethal. She spun the godkiller's sword in a deadly arc. The blade kissed past Shabak's neck. Before he could recover, Diana's spinning kick struck his chest. A shockwave burst outward, and the godly warrior was sent hurtling through several houses. Is he really a demon? Diana breathed, stunned as they watched him fly. An ancient demon from legend who's lived for countless years. Or is hell actually a restful place with no need for slaughter? Shabak's strength was vast and his frame imposing, but he was clumsy and slow, like someone unused to fighting savvy opponents. David had wanted to warn Diana not to underestimate him, but he'd been hasty. He had remembered only Shabak's raw stats and forgotten the limits of outdated software. Strength without finesse couldn't make the most of the hardware. Shabak scraped out through a rooftop, covered in dust, and slammed down into the fortress courtyard, furious and embarrassed. Before he could act, a strong, aged voice cut through the chaos. "My sister, I didn't expect our first meeting to be under such circumstances." A middle-aged man in a trench coat drifted in like nobility, hands clasped behind his back, every inch of him radiating arrogant sovereignty. "Lord Ares," someone murmured. Shabak bowed. He had once signed a divine contract with Ares, before Ares had aided him in retrieving his ancestor's crown, and he still deferred to the ancient god of war. Ares gave David a cool, uninterested glance, then spoke to Shabak. "I want to see how many of my attacks you can block." Shabak understood immediately. He stomped, the ground cracking beneath him, and barreled forward, throwing a punch that compressed the air and roared like a battering ram. David met the blow without flinching. If Shabak tried to bring flames into the fight, it would cost David a little more, but pure physical power, attacks that could sink warships, couldn't penetrate his defense. What exactly were David's abilities? How could he have so few weak points? Shabak wondered if, like Black Adam, David's powers were the composite gifts of many gods. Shabak's attempt to see pure strength as the Achilles heel failed. Every punishing strike was absorbed or countered. David's movements were sharp, efficient, and surgical, aimed at vital points. The exchanges shook the air into constant detonations, bang after bang, while Shabak, powerful but blunt, was repeatedly shoved back. It was like watching a martial arts master handle a brawler. "The power of the 6 demons of hell is completely wasted on you," David said coldly. Shabak felt exposed. He had more than brute force. He was supposed to have cunning, the evil wisdom of the demon king Belial, but his blows were messy, akin to a Hulk who only knew how to swing. "Like Shazam," David added, "one of the letters is just for show." The S, once the wisdom of Solomon, often looked useless. Likewise, Shabak's wisdom seemed to mean little more than reckless fighting. "You know the source of my power?" Shabak snarled as another strike landed on his neck. He staggered back, leaving deep craters in the ground. "Could you be the new champion chosen by those wizards after Black Adam?" Shabak pressed desperately. If David was a newly anointed paragon, he might be channeling different deities altogether. "Which god grants you your strength? The strength of Heracles? The body of Achilles?" Hate flared in Shabak's eyes as he attacked in a frantic, probing barrage, trying to force an answer. If the body of Achilles explained David's defense, then maybe he could find a flaw. Anger from Shabak 12. "Your useless chatter is as plentiful as your useless attacks," David replied, and launched into the next exchange. "Mortal, do you know who you're talking to? Your useless words are as numerous as your useless attacks." Ares' voice cut through the clamor like a blade. Each time David landed a heavier blow on Shabak, he had no idea where the man's mind had gone. Was this man so consumed with hatred for the wizard and Black Adam that he'd lost his senses? Diana was facing Ares himself, while David kept Shabak pinned down, calm and controlled. He didn't rush to challenge Ares. He wanted to be the one to kill the god of war, to make Ares hate him, to leave him seething with unwillingness, anger, and regret. There was a perverse satisfaction to be gained. Diana tore her attention from David's effortless suppression of Shabak and fixed it on the god before her. Her eyes narrowed. "You're Ares?" Ares had been regarding her with a slow, appreciative smile. "Of course, daughter of Hippolyta." He landed lightly on the ground and chuckled. "Didn't your mother tell you about your origins?" "My mother said she molded me from clay and begged Zeus to give me life," Diana replied, skeptical. Diana lashed the lasso of truth around Ares and demanded, "Speak the truth, god of war." Caught in the lasso, Ares seemed untroubled. "My sister, what I say is true." The lasso's power left no room for falsehood. Even gods were compelled to speak. Diana's face trembled. She had left Paradise Island with her mother's confident pronouncement ringing in her ears. Only a god can kill another god, except the god-killer's sword. Now the lasso suggested a different, more terrible truth. Diana's shock dissolved quickly into resolve. Her eyes flashed with killing intent. "It doesn't matter whether you're Zeus's son," she snarled. "What matters is you won't hurt anyone again. You won't incite wars and slaughter mortals." David watched Diana's clarity and decisiveness with a strange admiration. If anyone else learned they might be supposed to kill a sibling, they might freeze. She did not. In Greek myth, family ties are seldom sentimental, David thought, especially in Zeus's line. Diana tried to haul Ares in with the lasso, but she could not overpower the god of war. His eyes flickered, and a current of divine wind unraveled the lasso. He regarded her with cool condescension. "There's so much you still don't know." "To me, you're a child playing with toys," Ares said, disdain in every syllable. Diana had the blood of the All-Father running through her, one step from true godhood. yet she had not learned to wield that power. That made her predictable and perfectly convenient for him. "You will die, Ares," Diana roared. She surged forward like an avenging force of nature, the god-killer sword gripped in both hands. The earth seemed to hold its breath as the daughter of Hippolyta, perhaps a child of Zeus, drove the blade toward the eldest son of the All-Father. Shabak, only just rising from a disheveled sprawl, felt his pulse tighten. He had seen what the sword could do. He wondered how a god so renowned for 1,000 years would answer such an assault. Would Ares dodge? "My sister, would you kill me for the mortals?" Ares asked gently. The god-killer pierced Ares's palm, as if the blade meant nothing but air. Then, as if touched by some erasing force, the sword's body crumbled into ash. Only the hilt remained, lodged in his hand. Ares did not flinch. He shook his head, disappointment etched across his features. "I thought you might at least be following orders left by our father. You disappoint me. Gods are masters above all, not servants of mortals." Diana staggered backward, staring at the bare hilt. The sword her mother had said was forged by the god of fire had been annihilated. Shabak's face went pale. He had known better than to resist Ares after gaining his powers. A whole divine weapon had been reduced to ash as if it were paper. David, alone among them, showed only a different look, one of knowing calm rather than shock. "That is not the god-killer, my sister," he said quietly. Ares blew the dust from his palm with the regal impatience of a god regarding a child. "You are the ultimate weapon, father, left to deal with me." The realization hit Diana like a blow. If her mother had lied about her origins, then maybe the sword had been a decoy. If she herself was meant to be the weapon, then the true threat to Ares wasn't steel at all. She glanced at David, then bent to toss the useless hilt aside, ready to rely on her own strength. If only a god could kill another god, she would have to be the instrument. "Do you really think victory isn't built on lies and deception?" David murmured as she moved to drop the hilt. Diana paused. He looked at Ares with no reverence, only cold appraisal. "The god of war's reputation spreads across this planet. You've been painted as strength, arrogance, bloodlust, cruelty, but there's another description you deserve." The air changed. Ares' eyes darkened. "Mortal, do you know who you're speaking to?" His voice rolled like thunder. The sky answered. Clouds gathered, shrank and sagged, and electricity writhed like venom through them. Metal debris trembled on the ground and rose, a rain of blades and fragments driven by a god's will. The scene turned into something from a nightmare, steel and shrapnel hurtling toward David as if heaven itself sought to shred him. Walls meant to resist even anti-tank fire were chewed into Swiss cheese, but David stood, unbowed, as if he had already considered his reply. He had taken the jolt of Ares' wrath in stride. "A liar," he said. Diana's memory blinked. Her thrust had missed, the sword had dissolved, and the hilt looked bare. Shabak, too, wore a look of stunned fear. But David met Ares without flinching. "You use your divine power to blind and distort the senses," he continued calmly. "You stage your invulnerability so people will abandon the only thing that can threaten you." 92. How dare you say that? Mortal, the god of war, Ares, whose name alone had once cowed armies, had been called a liar. "No one has ever dared speak to me like that." Arrogance drained from Ares' face and was replaced by furious rage. Lightning flashed in his eyes. A divine force erupted from his towering form like a detonating star, rippling outward with unimaginable power. The reinforced concrete fortress around them shredded as if it were paper. Boom, boom. Shabak threw himself up, palms pressed against the pressure wave, trying in vain to hold it back. Diana planted her shield and braced her legs as the blast dug 2 deep furrows under her boots. Purple energy shimmered over David, warding off the worst of the force. A section of wall, weighing tons, tore free and hurtled toward him, trailed by slicing shards. Energy beams cut through the debris. 2 smooth slabs screamed past. David barely glanced at them and kept his eyes fixed on Ares, who had risen into the air. "Mortal," Ares intoned, voice cold with scorn, "I admire your courage." Steel and scrap seemed drawn into him, clinging and melting into a heavy savage armor that crawled across his body. A brutal battle axe formed in his hand. Its presence alone stifled the air. He hung in the void above them and looked down. "But today you will learn the consequences of angering a god." "A god?" David answered calmly, as if stating a simple truth. You are not worthy of that name in my presence." Enraged, Ares dove like a meteor and swung his axe with cataclysmic force. "Mortal, you are insolent." Diana flicked her golden lasso of truth with one hand to help. The lasso uncoiled in a blur toward Ares, but he barely glanced at it. The storm of divine power around him simply blew it aside. "Sister," he called offhandedly, "let me finish with this mortal first. Then we'll deal with you." The air compressed and the ground under David's feet depressed several inches. He clenched his fist. Universe energy condensed into a translucent purple sphere in his palm, and he launched it straight at the descending axe. Shabak stared. David had met the weapon god not with steel, but with bare hands. It was reckless. Since time immemorial, war had been the trade of metal and blades. Even a crude molten steel axe, blessed by Ares' authority, could split mountains. The impact detonated like 1,000,000 tons of explosives. The earth ripped outward in a tidal roar, leaving a vast crater. At its center, Ares' eyes burned with fury. His swing posture remained intact. He had expected the mortal to be pulverized. Instead, a fist had taken the blow. "Only those with unimaginable power are gods," David said, rising from the shock like a man brushing dust from his sleeve. The universe energy in his fists surged. "Your power before me feels a little weak." Ares felt the force push back. The axe answered with its own titanic counterblow. He retreated on the defensive while David pressed the attack. "Throw away your arrogance," David warned as he struck. "I don't want slaying you to be too easy. It should leave a mark." "Slay me? How dare you speak so, mortal?" Ares' surprise rippled into rage. He swung in wide arcs, each strike loaded with cataclysmic weight. David met some blows with raw energy blasts, others with blocking fists. He showed none of the fluster of a lesser opponent. If anything, he was composed against the furious god. After the Black King template fusion passed 60%, David's kinetic absorption improved significantly. It made the difference now. Ares' armor and axe were only temporarily condensed. His ancient war gear, forged in the old battles, was nowhere to be seen. Those relics, the ones that had nearly cleaved Darkseid in too long ago, were gone, destroyed or lost when Ares betrayed the Olympian gods. Had that axe been present, David would not have been so brazen. Buzz. David sidestepped a wild stroke and thrust his palm. Ares met it with one armored arm, his bulk withstanding the energy impact. He roared and charged forward. "A mere mortal speaks of killing a god. Your head will hang on my trophy wall." Lightning danced along his axe. Each swing, though momentarily matched, left Ares confident of ultimate victory. Then an attack came from behind. Sensing it, Ares spun and raised his axe to block. The god-killer sword struck, slicing through the axe, almost severing the weapon whole. "David was right," someone said coldly. "You really did lie to me." Diana had launched the strike. Her eyes glittered. To her sight, the god-killer sword appeared only as a hilt, no blade, yet it had cleaved the axe as if it were flesh. Ares snarled. "With this sword, you and this mortal will share the same fate." His deceit exposed, Ares jammed axe against the long hilt and shoved. With a domineering sweep, he kicked at Diana, as if to remind her weapon was useless without awakened divine power. "You, child, wield an adult's weapon and call yourself ready." Diana bristled and raised her wrist to block. Before Ares' kick connected, a purple riptide of energy slammed him sideways. He rolled, his axe digging into the ground and snagging to stop his momentum. Ares rose, grimacing, and spat one word at Shabak. "Useless." Shabak flinched under the rebuke but didn't argue. A fresh wound on his chest was already knitting closed. He had meant to interfere so Ares could finish the mortal alone, but Diana's god-killer sword cuts ignored his defenses. A few strikes had forced him to dodge. The four now faced each other, 2 against 2, each gaze laden with murderous intent. Compared to the others, David's clothes were unscathed. He stood calm and whole. That appearance owed not to invulnerability, but to control. Absorbing kinetic energy and other forces made defense simple for him, so long as attacks stayed under his absorption limit. For anything beyond that, he relied on raw physical resilience. Unless an enemy struck at absolute peak, they could not easily hurt him. "Kill them," Ares shouted. Together, Ares and the obedient Shabak surged. David and Diana leapt to meet them. The four clashed in a maelstrom of power amid the shattered ruins of the fortress. The mountain flank the structure had defended now trembled under the deafening explosions of airwaves and the impact of colliding might. Among the fighters stood an ancient god of war, the daughter of Zeus, a being touched by the 6 demon kings of hell, and a mortal whose strength rivaled a god. Their blows shook the world. Bang, bang, bang. The mountains shuddered as their battle thundered on. Kandak's capital trembled. The city was gripped with panic. Is it an earthquake? A missile strike? People craned their necks toward the base, outside the city, where a column of fierce flames, blinding lightning, and strange purple energy braided together and filled almost half the sky. Nobody knew what was happening. Sizzle, Ares unleashed divine lightning, a crackling roar like Zeus's own power. David could no longer afford to be casual. He straightened up, abandoning any pretense of protecting his Hawaiian shirt and shorts. Bang! After another head-on collision, he shoved Ares back. A bolt of lightning from Ares' axe arced across and ripped a seam in David's shoulder. Sparks danced, but he was unharmed and simply brushed them off. Diana had forced Shabak back with her sword, then elbowed him as he scrambled to dodge. Back to back, she and David faced 2 monstrous opponents. Diana glanced at Ares, still whole, scowling, and hesitated before saying the truth. You can't kill Ares. Only a god can kill a god. Leave him to me. Her mother had told her to wait until both David and Ares were wounded before she intervened, but David had already helped her, and more than that, she believed he wasn't a monster. You conquered Paradise Island without slaughtering anyone, she said. Even when my people preferred death to surrender, you didn't slaughter or coerce us. You tried to break the Amazon's will by killing Ares. You're not that bad. David smiled inwardly at Diana's innocence. He had known these rules for a long time, and her simple faith in the truth now made her open and unafraid of being deceived. With your current power, you can't take Ares down, he warned. Ares, diminished from his ancient glory but still terrifying, was not someone an undertrained Diana could handle. She frowned, but refused to back down. Amazons do not fear death, she said. If I must die today, I will die with Ares. Shield in one hand, sword in the other, her face was set with grim determination. Paradise Island had enjoyed long peace, but for generations Ares' shadow had hung over it, especially lately, as Zeus's influence waned. Diana had watched her mother stare out over the island with worry more times than she could count. Just keep yourself safe, David said evenly, then leapt at Ares. Why can only a god kill a god? Diana wanted to know, and David answered while attacking. Gods bound to the world are separated by a dimensional veil. Imagine throwing a stone on a pond. The ripples you see are not the deep water beneath. Mortals can wound the reflection, stir the surface, even chip at it, but you can't strike down the god beneath through that layer. No matter how grievous the wounds appear, gods mend in an instant. Only another god can strike true. Ares' armor cracked, and his skin smoked under the universe's heat, but he paid it no mind. Like a berserker, he swung his axe with savage momentum. Your attacks are futile. Mortals are mortals. Gods are gods, he spat. When he poured divine power into his strikes, the mortal before him could no longer shrug them off. Where his blows had once seemed to vanish into some bottomless sea, now they landed into something that could not absorb godly force. David sidestepped a sweeping axe, then drove a fist, packed with condensed cosmic energy that seemed capable of shaking the earth and sunder mountains, into Ares' head. Calm as an icy lake, David asked, what makes a god different from a mortal? Gods cannot be killed. That's the difference, he answered with the blow. Ares' bullhorn helmet flew free. His head snapped back, but he came on with a hideous grin carved into his scarred, reddened face. Pain and injury only whetted his bloodlust. Mortals slaying gods is a myth, he roared. Confident, he ramped up his fury. His divine reserves were drained, but he figured the mortal's stamina wasn't endless. He could grind him down with brute force. Around them, the landscape shredded. What had been the ruins of a fortress now cracked and spalled outward as the 4 fighters tore the mountainside apart. Craters bloomed like wounds. David and Diana each had a narrow edge over their opponents, but neither advantage was decisive. The fight had settled into a war of attrition. Diana's worry gnawed at her. She could not believe it would be that simple. Ares felt the same dogged certainty. You're right. Ares snarled, as white airwaves exploded in concentric rings with each collision of steel and energy. Whether by bloodline or by assuming godhood, anyone who wields divine power is a god. He unleashed another lightning-jagged strike. So, mortal, who stands beside Zeus's daughter? Are you of divine blood, or have you stolen godhood? He laughed, mocking. His axe cleaved the air and was seized by David, who met the blow like a press crushing down. Bloodline or godhood, whose descendant are you? Where did you get your power? Ares knew there was no trace of divine aura about David. The question was meant to humiliate. David shrugged almost apologetically. Neither. I have neither. The ground split beneath his feet. Even in the middle of a savage fight, David's lips curved into a small smile. But I do have divine power. The instant he said it, his eyes flared with electric light. Sizzle, two brilliant bolts of lightning struck through the void with blinding speed and terror. Ares, close by, was caught full in the face by the flash. His sneer faltered. His eyes widened in shocked recognition. 94. Death of Ares. This is... Two familiar bolts of divine lightning flashed through the air and arrived in an instant. Ares' eyes went wide. Before he could finish the sentence, it turned into a scream. Ah, my eyes! His head snapped back. Ares clutched his sockets with one bloody hand, while the other swung his axe wildly, retreating in panic. The sudden, close-range strike came with no warning and struck his eyes directly, plunging him into immediate darkness. Unlike the previous blows, this one carried true divine power, wounds that would not heal on their own. You stole my divinity, you despicable, hateful thief. Sizzle. Hearing Ares' enraged, fearful roar, David remained calm. He condensed divine power into a lightning spear that crackled in his hand like a hunter preparing the final thrust against prey trapped in a snare. I smell fear. Are you afraid, ancient god of war? He walked slowly toward the disheveled first son of the Skyfather. The situation had collapsed in a heartbeat. Only moments ago, Ares had been merely at a disadvantage. Now his eyes were ruined. Mortal, you cannot kill me. The thunder of the approaching spear was like cawing crows in Ares' ears, and every step David took pounded in his heart. Fear and fury warred inside him. Spurred by mockery, Ares roared and swung his axe, blind and hopeless. Without sight, he was no match for David. Calm and unhurried, David hurled the spear like a flash of lightning. It sliced through Ares' throat, sent his towering form flying backward, and pinned him to the ground. Ares' axe skittered from his grasp. Ares coughed blood, trying to rise, but a boot pressed into his chest like a mountain. He was grievously wounded. His power drained fast as he lay pinned. I will return, mortal. I swear by the name of the god of war. I will return and make you feel pain deeper than Prometheus endured under my father's punishment. Blood spattered his words as he spat a furious, hateful roar. As expected of a god, David murmured, admiring the bitter breath. His throat is pierced, yet he can still speak. It doesn't change his voice at all. Ares thrashed, blinded and humiliated, tearing open his two bleeding eye sockets and bellowing like a maddened beast. I will definitely return, mortal. When I return, it will be your day of death. If you were the god of anger, with this rage you might still have strength, David said, disdain curving his voice. But you're not. Save your strength. Think about how you'll return to Mount Olympus and face the gods you betrayed. As if struck by a final bolt, Ares' hate-fueled roar cut short. His neck was torn apart by divine lightning. His head, eyes still bleeding, flew free and hit the earth like a thrown ball, rolling in the dust. Fury, hatred, and the last stubborn refusal to accept defeat were frozen on his face. Hatred from Ares, god of war, +155. Dying with unclosed eyes, David mused. Before he could linger longer over the sight, Ares' body dissolved into motes of light and scattered across the world. Diana and Shabak, who had stopped fighting on the other side, watched in stunned silence. The god of war was killed by him. By a mortal? Diana's face was full of disbelief. She had seen David channel divine power, but didn't understand how he had done it. Shabak was terrified. Even the ancient god of war, whose fame had stretched across the world for millennia, had died at this young man's hands. He had thought Ares an easy target to bully. Unease from Shabak and 32, Fear 122. David had paid almost no price for the kill. His clothes were only slightly tattered, and he had no wounds. It was astonishing. As David looked up, Shabak's face went white with panic. Like a startled bird, he took to the sky in a blink, an inheritance of the Hell Demon's ability, and fled, vanishing into the clouds. David looked on with mild surprise. He had no desire to pursue him. Killing Shabak offered no benefit. Diana stood holding the God-killer's sword, regret and awe warring on her face for letting the demon slip away. "You killed the god of war?" she asked. "As you can see." David approached. Diana, still shaking from shock, blurted, "How did you do it?" David only glanced at her. She realized the question was foolish. Secrets about one's power, especially god-slaying power, aren't given away. Then Diana remembered something crucial and froze. David, a mortal, had slain a god. If the Amazon tribe's promise held, they would have to accept him as their king. Her expression shifted, then she fell silent. Mother never imagined this, she thought. Her mother had expected David might siphon some of Ares' power so Diana could kill him, relieving the shadow that loomed over Paradise Island. She had never expected she wouldn't be needed at all. The man before them had almost single-handedly slain Ares without serious injury. Standing on the ruined battlefield as the sun sank, Diana watched David's profile and felt something tremble in her chest, an almost mythic awe, as if the legends her mother had told were coming alive. He was an unyielding hero who, faced with an impossible task, completed it with overwhelming strength and confidence. Though his goal had been conquest of the Amazons, no one had died in the process. With the God-killer's sword in her hand, the same sword that had even inspired fear in Ares, Diana felt conflicted. Should the tribe go back on their promise? A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she shook it away, deciding to honor their vow unless David did something unforgivable. David paid no mind to her turmoil. Now that Ares was dead, Paradise Island lay before him. What remained was taking control and dealing with the Amazons who had wanted to use him as a weapon. They would have to pay for that, he decided. He already had a plan to make them submit to him, bitterly and reluctantly, yet without open resistance. He allowed himself a quieter thought. I wonder what happened with Clark. Has his eyesight recovered? 40 blue t-shirts? No problem. I'll have them by Wednesday. In Metropolis, inside a small clothing store, Clark, without a cane or sunglasses, stood nervously at the counter. He tried to look like any other customer. All with this logo? That's a bit tricky. What is this exactly? The slightly overweight owner held a piece of paper and stroked his chin as he examined the design. Your school's emblem? A student group? On the paper was a red and yellow pattern inside a diamond outline with a large S in the center. It's my personal symbol, Clark said. He touched a stamp-like, elongated object in his pocket. The image he'd seen these past days had crystallized something in him, and he felt certain. The setting sun cast a warm glow over his face as he smiled. A personal symbol. What's the meaning of that? The owner shrugged, a little puzzled. The young man wasn't a celebrity. It was probably just teenage pride, a kid thinking he was special and designing his own logo. As long as it wasn't a gang or terrorist mark, he didn't want the trouble. He figured it was just another adolescent fantasy. 95. The first appearance of Superman. Not long after Clark left the clothing store, he disguised himself and went back. After making sure the shopkeeper didn't recognize him, he swallowed his excitement and left. This was a new ability he had unexpectedly discovered after he went blind. He had already told Chloe and Pietro, who were closest to him, that his vision had been affected by some illness and might be temporary. Chloe and Pietro were anxious and worried. Chloe was afraid he would fall into despair over the holidays if he thought he might lose his sight for good. As before, she insisted on bringing him along on her reporting jobs. She wanted him to feel useful, to keep busy, to build confidence so he wouldn't have time to brood. Thinking of this, Clark walked down the street with a white cane, looking like a blind man, and couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. But people he wasn't close to kept asking what had happened to his eyes when they ran into him. Clark knew most of them meant well. A look of helplessness crossed his face. One lie was hard enough. Every time someone asked, he'd have to repeat it. So during the days around the holiday, he avoided familiar faces, ducking into alleys or slipping past people, hoping they wouldn't see him. And strangely, more and more often, they didn't. Clark didn't know when this had started. At first, he thought it was the sunglasses, but even without them, and even when he stopped the other person to speak, they didn't recognize him. The voice and the heartbeat were familiar enough to tell him he wasn't mistaken. It was as if he could walk past acquaintances unseen. Knock, knock. In an apartment in Metropolis, Clark knocked on the door. "You're finally here, Clark. Come in, quick." Chloe, putting on makeup and doing her hair, hurried him into the room. "I was worried something happened to you on the way. I nearly died of fright." "This isn't Smallville," Clark said with a smile. "Metropolis has endless traffic. Don't worry. Haven't you seen me getting around? I'm used to my life now." "If it weren't for you and Pietro seeing you go up and down those stairs like nothing's wrong, I'd think you were playing a prank," Chloe said. She paused, studying him. Clark had adapted to blindness in less than 2 days, faster than most people who'd been blind for years. Chloe had started to accept the oddities about him. "Sometimes I swear you have some kind of hypnotic power." Clark's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" "It's like you have some strange charm. You're so talented at everything, but people always overlook you. Your background at school. Tall and handsome, great at sports and studies, Clark had every advantage, yet he had always been invisible at Smallville High." "Speaking of talent," Chloe said, changing the subject, "your cousin sounds amazing. Why have you never mentioned that Lois Lane is related to you?" Clark pushed his sunglasses up on his head and asked the question he'd long wanted to ask. "Is it ever good when someone in your family outshines you?" Chloe froze with a blush, then sighed. Clark understood the feeling well. "When can I meet her?" Clark thought for a moment. He'd spent a lot of time reading while he was blind, broadening his horizons with newspapers and news broadcasts. Lois Lane's reporting fascinated him. She never flinched from exposing corruption and darkness. Her writing's bold, fearless. Reading her pieces is like watching a war dance. Chloe snapped the makeup compact shut. "She's busy." "What? Have you won great honors? Got billions in the bank? Are you a celebrity? If not, she probably won't have time." Clark had been thinking of something else entirely. Reading Lois's work had shown him how many people suffered in the world, how many needed help. It had inspired him to act, hence the appearance of the Blue Hood in Metropolis, a small change of image that Pietro joked made him look like a bank robber. Chloe slapped her forehead. "Clark!" "What?" he asked, puzzled at the sudden shout. He couldn't read her expression anymore, even though his eyes could still shoot heat rays. Blindness had cost him subtle cues. "Do you think my plan for the interview with that Vietnam veteran is too ordinary?" she asked, catching her breath. "No," Clark waved her off. "Not at all." Chloe shoved the notebook into his hands. "Come on, let's go." On the courthouse roof, masked robbers had dragged a female police officer unconscious and tied her up. They stood casually, several in bulletproof vests, one leader with a monkey-like mask barking orders into a phone. A helicopter, waiting nearby, hummed softly. "Besides her, there's no other evidence against you, sir," the leader said into the receiver. "Good," an older man with white hair and an air of CEO authority replied. "I have an important meeting at 1. Finish this quickly, take her in the helicopter, and get out of there at top speed." "Understood, sir," the man on the phone answered. "Let that lady go," a voice suddenly called. The robbers whipped their heads around. They'd expected police, not a single young man standing on the roof. He wore a blue t-shirt and a red cape that fluttered in the wind. Tall, broad-shouldered like a statue, he stood with his hands on his hips and his chest thrust out under the sun. His pose was a little awkward, but it radiated a simple, earnest confidence. "Kid, which circus did you escape from?" the monkey-faced leader sneered. He pointed a gun at the young man and mocked him. The others laughed. "I'm in a good mood today," the leader said, giving him one chance. "Get out of my sight in 3 seconds." "And if we don't?" another asked. The leader's face darkened. "Shoot him. Turn him into Swiss cheese." The robbers laughed and opened fire. Guns spat. Bullets cracked through the air toward the blue figure. "Die, funny kid," they shouted. 96. The Amazons surrendered. Bang, bang, bang. Gunfire cracked like thunder. In the bright sunlight, the figure looked as if he were cast from steel. Bullets pinged off him and couldn't even tear his clothes. The shots echoed against the buildings and the pavement, and Clark could picture everything at once. He smiled, flashing white teeth, and addressed the robbers. "Gentlemen, a suggestion. Stop wasting ammo. Put down your guns and surrender. That way, I can keep you from getting hurt." The robbers, their faces hidden behind animal masks, froze, rubbing their eyes as if trying to wake from a dream. How could bullets that dented concrete not even rip a shirt? "What is this? Am I having a vision?" one muttered. "Are we seeing ghosts in daylight?" another whispered. "Shut up. Freak, try this," the monkey mask leader snarled, forcing himself to calm down. He hefted an RPG and fired at the towering figure. The rocket screamed out, a white trail of exhaust behind it. Clark's ears twitched. He moved with lightning speed, dodging the blast, ignoring the heat of the propulsion. The rocket, like a trapped bird, couldn't escape, its tail still spewing fuel. Clark twisted its trajectory just enough to send it skyward. To keep it from falling back and endangering civilians if it lost power, he unleashed a burst of heat vision and detonated the rocket safely above the rooftops. "Monster!" Someone screamed. Eyes flashed with fear as the robbers scattered. Clark blurred forward. A few were knocked down. The unconscious female police officer was freed, and ropes found to tie up the bandits. He checked the officer. She was alive. He breathed out, a smile spreading across his face. It felt good to hide his true identity and work as a vigilante, using his power to help people. He turned to the rising sun, resolve in his gaze, and leapt away toward the next cry for help. A camera shutter clicked from somewhere below the street. Instinctively, he looked down, but a flash blinded him for a heartbeat. All he could make out were two figures standing together, one with a stronger, more rapid breathing and heartbeat, clearly male, and the other slower, female. The woman seemed tall. By the cadence of her breath, he guessed she was at least 1.7 meters. Then, leaping like a bird between rooftops, Clark streaked into the distance. "What is this, Lois?" The voice came from the Daily Planet editor's office. Editor-in-Chief White, a middle-aged man with graying temples, had set his coffee down and stared at the photograph in his hand. A figure leapt between skyscrapers, dozens of meters apart, a tall shadow against the golden light and a red cape fluttering behind him. "My discovery and follow-up report," he said. At the desk, Lois Lane, confident, sharp, and always on the hunt for a story, folded her arms. She had made a name for herself in the newsroom and was not one to be easily convinced. "No matter where you got this rumor, there's nothing to dig into here. It's likely a photoshopped image." White looked at her sternly. "Jimmy took this photo. I was there too." "Okay, maybe some reckless kid used a springboard to jump between rooftops," Lois said. "That's a community police matter, not a front-page scoop. Give me something explosive." She set another stack of photos on his desk, close-ups of bullet marks, dented shell casings, and fragments from a rocket-propelled grenade that had fallen from the sky. More than one eyewitness says this person confronted armed thugs on the courthouse roof, stopped a kidnapping, even prevented a murder. They describe a body like steel, the ability to leap dozens of meters with a single jump, and movement like a gust of wind. A superhuman moving through Metropolis to fight crime, and notably, not hiding his face. Lois's eyes lit up. Her reporter's instinct told her this would be huge. The city would buzz about him instantly, and she would find this vigilante and get the first exclusive. Excited, she tapped the photos. "Raise your leg higher." "Yes, a little higher," she mimicked, smiling at the thought of the chase to come. Paradise Island, in the ancient hall, music flowed, elegant and melodious. David sat with his chin in his hand, watching the parade ground below where a group of Amazon warriors, dressed awkwardly in white tutus, strained to perform delicate, swan-like movements to the projection on a large screen. They were warriors accustomed to swords and bows, and the ballet steps made them look clumsy. David barely noticed the hostile stares aimed at him. He only saw the tide of emotion that met his return. When David and Diana had come back to Paradise Island, Hippolyta had sensed trouble. Diana had claimed to have seen David slay Ares, the god of war, news that shocked the entire tribe. "That outsider actually killed a god? Is it true, princess?" others demanded. Among the dancers, Diana stood out, tall, striking, and awkward in the fairy tale costume. She was the lead dancer chosen by David. She tried to move with grace, but her discomfort was clear. No one wanted to believe a mortal could slay a god, not even Hippolyta, who eyed David with suspicion and suggested using the lasso of truth to confirm whether her daughter was under some influence. The result surprised everyone. Diana had spoken the truth. Now, seated on the throne, David looked down at the assembly, the decision resting with the tribe. Will the Amazon people, whose heritage spans 10,000 years, break their sacred word and suffer erasure from the world at my hand? Or will you honor your promise and enthrone me as king? His gaze was steady as he presented them with their final choice. 97. Can't I just enjoy it? Under David's deep, imperious gaze, the Amazon tribe honored their promise. They proclaimed him their new king and knelt on one knee. The Amazon tribe never lies, never breaks a promise, they intoned. Hippolyta and the others proved it with their actions. Though unwilling, they refused to go back on their word. Still in shock, they gritted their teeth and bowed their heads to the new king. For thousands of years, Paradise Island had known only women, but now there was a man, and he was king of the Amazon tribe. I know that even though I've done something greater than Heracles, you're not eager to submit, David said from the throne with a smile. Nearly enslaved, you have always longed for freedom. He paused, a pensive look in his eyes. As he pronounced his coronation speech, a flicker of hope appeared in the Amazons' faces. Maybe David would set a time limit on his rule, or offer some way out, perhaps a challenge in which if a strong Amazon defeated him, she could claim the island. Instead, his next words came with a wicked smile. But it doesn't matter. I don't really need your hearts anyway. I just need your bodies to obey my commands. The Amazons bristled with fury. They could hardly believe what they were hearing. David continued, adopting the air of a thoroughly corrupt monarch. Now I issue my first command as king. From today onward, you will begin to practice dance. Each of you is tall and well-proportioned, with long legs. It would be a shame not to use them for dancing. Dance? The word echoed among them like a slap. The Amazons, born warriors who could wrestle lions and strip steel with their bare hands, found the decree preposterous. Their customs had always been fierce. Deceit was scorned. And yet, the man who had fought them, slain a god, and taken the throne was asking them to put down bows and swords and learn dance. I protest. The bodies the gods gave us are not meant to entertain others like court dancers, one of them shouted. Diana, standing below, was stunned. Dance? She whispered. No one, not Hippolyta, not Antiope, not the others, had expected the first royal command to be this. A man had beaten them in combat, killed Ares, and now his first order was to watch them dance? It seems the Amazon tribe doesn't keep its promises as much as it claims. David's sigh was oddly mocking as he scanned the discontented faces. Who said that? Someone snapped back. You do, David replied. I haven't, like Caligula, claimed the right of the first night. I haven't, like Ares, ordered you to wage endless war and conquer the world at the cost of your lives. My first decree is simply that you learn to dance, and you won't even obey that. The Amazons were angry at the implication, but also uncertain. One moment they had crowned him, the next they were defying such a trivial order. If David had massacred them or committed atrocities that would outrage heaven and earth, their resistance would be understandable and their honor intact. But dancing, something so minor, felt humiliating. Hippolyta, struggling to reconcile the absurdity, said stiffly, Our king, you conquered a people born of the gods. Was it only to make us dance? Otherwise, David countered, I fought the Amazon tribe, battled the god of war and killed him, and became king. Can't I enjoy myself? The logic stung, even as it felt absurd. It was like conquering Rome with 1,000,000 soldiers and then demanding raisins as tribute. The Amazons, proud warriors, found the notion of dressing as court dancers unbearable. Yet it was hardly worth dying over. Reluctantly, they obeyed the royal decree. David had already ordered everything needed on his way back. White gauze skirts, stockings, dance shoes. They were to avoid war horses and bows and clumsily learn the steps. Not bad, David said at one rehearsal as the music finished. He clapped. In a few years, maybe it'll be barely watchable. Inside the palace, the movements were awkward and forced. Swan Lake, a ballet of grace and melancholy, was being transformed by strong, taut bodies into something more like a battle dance, swift, powerful, even lethal. Outside in the square, it was the same. It looks like the swans you play could peck a lion to death, David commented, amused. Anger and embarrassment flared across the faces of the Amazons. Except for you, Diana, you're still barely acceptable. David pointed at Diana and gave an honest assessment. Unlike the others, she learned quickly. Her attitude was earnest. She practiced diligently in obedience to the decree, and her dance already showed a hint of the elegant, proud swan. Zeus, for all his faults, had excellent blood, David added with a sigh. He produced many beautiful and intelligent offspring. Praised in public, Diana's smile was bitter. The gazes that followed her felt heavy. She couldn't enjoy the compliment. If anything, she wished David would reveal some blatant cruelty or ambition she could openly oppose, anything that would justify revolt and free her from this life of forced pretense. David understood that forcing the Amazons into ballet was, in a way, worse than death. Humiliation cut deep, filling them with impotent rage. If looks alone could kill, he would have been torn from the throne long ago. But this was a petty indignity, not tyranny. The Amazons had no real reason to rebel, so they continued to obey. Over the next month, their progress was minimal. The dancing remained a dismal sight. David wondered if, when Zeus and the other gods made this race, they had truly maximized warrior talent and ignored any other gifts. In contrast, his own template fusion progress seemed to skyrocket. So, he mused, watching another awkward rehearsal, the Amazon tribe's talent for dance is really zero. Diana sat quietly to the side in the throne hall, wearing a white gown cut in an ancient Roman style. An old golden harp rested in her lap like an offering from some Mount Olympus nymph. Her slim fingers plucked the strings, sending a clear, rippling sound through the room. On the throne, David had his eyes closed, fingers tapping the rhythm against his knee, a small, satisfied smile on his face. "You seem unusually cheerful today," Diana said, letting the music continue. Her voice held a little hesitation. To her, life as Amazon Queen had offered few pleasures, endless drills, parades, and the same dancers day after day. The past few days of watching Diana learn the harp had been mildly tolerable, but she still wondered what had put him in such a good mood when nothing notable had happened. David didn't open his eyes. "Why not?" he answered lightly. There was a reason he was pleased, though he kept most of it to himself. The Black King template had merged past 90%. If he had to face Ares again now, he wouldn't need to strain. He could cut that son of Zeus down far faster than before. "The template is at 95%, he let slip, smiling faintly as a private thought. Diana's fingers stilled on the strings for a moment. David's mind drifted, imagining what would come next. Conquering the Amazon tribe had been the right move. Hippolyta's people provided steady emotional points, and their contribution had accelerated the fusion like switching from a bicycle to a motorcycle. "Our trip to Paradise Island wasn't wasted," he murmured. "There's another ancient, more powerful race on this world." He glanced at Diana. As a daughter of Zeus, she was exceptional. Her dancing had improved in under a month to the point a strict choreographer would find no fault. Teaching her to play the harp had been his way of giving her something beyond the sword and shield. Diana, harp in hand, watched him with a complicated look. Since their return to Paradise Island, she had finally forced Hippolyta to answer questions she'd kept for years. Why Ares knew her, why he called her a weapon of Zeus, why Hippolyta had never told her she was Zeus's child. Reluctantly, her mother had revealed the secret. When the gods were slaughtered by Ares and forced to leave the world, Hippolyta had been left with a child in her womb. Zeus had arranged for Diana to be the one to slay Ares and had endowed her with artifacts no other godchild possessed. Hippolyta had never believed Diana could succeed against the god who had toppled Olympus. She had delayed telling her daughter out of fear. If David hadn't arrived when he did, Hippolyta might have waited until Ares discovered Paradise Island in desperation before revealing the truth. Diana's lips moved as she plucked a few gentle notes. "Thank you," she said softly. David looked up, surprised. "Thank me for what?" "For killing Ares, for stopping him from starting wars and slaughtering innocents," she answered, looking away as if replaying the battle in her mind. "It was supposed to be my destiny, but if you hadn't been there, I would have been tricked into dropping the God-Killer sword. I could have lost the only thing that could hurt him, and then... who knows?" He shrugged. "Don't sell yourself short. Your bloodline holds power. Even without me, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that you could have killed him." Diana shook her head gently, unwilling to accept that. David smiled inwardly. There was no rush. Atlantis lay deep beneath the sea and could not simply run away. He had been away almost a month, time to return home and see how his parents were faring. He wondered, with a private amusement, whether Clark had grown used to his job as a Daily Planet reporter's assistant. He was also curious whether the rumor was true. Had Clark met Lois Lane and sparked anything? In most worlds, the son of Krypton seemed destined to be entangled with Lois. To celebrate, David said, standing. How about we go to the Blue River restaurant? A proper drink. The meeting in Metropolis was meant to be a simple celebration. A white-haired magnate named Glenn Morgan adjusted his tie and beamed as he spoke to the short, nervous Mediterranean businessman across the table. The man's forehead was slick with cold sweat. His pale face shifted constantly as he glanced at the hulking men in the room who looked more like enforcers than bodyguards. "Don't insult me, Mr. Glenn Morgan," the little man stammered. "I don't touch alcohol." Glenn Morgan's smile tightened. He had just closed a deal worth tens of millions, yet the guest had the gall to refuse his invitation. The enforcers' faces went flat. A few of them took a step forward. The short man trembled noticeably, like prey in the presence of a predator. "This is my invitation," Glenn Morgan said coldly. Before the situation could escalate, a shadow burst through the glass. A tall figure vaulted down from the floor above and crashed through the window with a thunder of shattering glass. The men in the room froze. "Who the hell? This is the 29th floor!" someone shouted. Glass spun through the air as the figure landed in the center of the meeting. A red cape snapped, a blue tunic flashed, and a familiar S shone on a broad chest. The onlookers' murmur rose into alarmed whispers. "Is that Superman? The Daily Planet was right?" The enforcers glanced between their employer and the newcomer. The rumor had followed the Metropolis vigilante for months, faster than a train, able to leap higher than a bird, nearly impervious to bullets. The short businessman's knees nearly gave way. The man who had landed, Clark, looked around at the shocked faces. The name Superman struck him with an odd familiarity. He knew it as the moniker Lois Lane often used in the paper. He had yet to have a proper meeting with Lois as Clark Kent, but his Superman identity had already brushed against her in ways he couldn't quite untangle. For now, all he permitted himself was the quiet, practiced calm that came before action and an unspoken warning in his steady gaze. 99. About me. Being falsely accused of plagiarism. I didn't want to interrupt readers, and I originally planned to let everyone quietly read the book. But these past few days, someone accused me of plagiarism, and since the matter has finally been resolved, I want to give a brief, clear account of what happened. The incident began when the author of Superman's younger brother, But I Became Homelander, accused me of plagiarism and asked an editor to report and take down my book. The editor reviewed his so-called color palette, a side-by-side comparison, and did not believe I had plagiarized. Instead of accepting that, the accuser posted the comparison in author groups and on a web novel forum, trying to rally support. He called me a plagiarizing dog, wished me ill, and urged others, authors and readers, to pressure me with public opinion. Some authors who didn't know the whole story joined in and attacked this book's comment section. There were curious onlookers, sarcastic posts, and outright accusations that I had done a Chinese-to-Chinese translation. To protect the community and reduce the noise, I had to raise the comment threshold repeatedly, from 1 point to 100, then 200, and finally to the maximum of 500 points. Even so, many people still donated just to leave inflammatory comments. After the situation was settled, I deleted most of those comments. Because I was being publicly attacked, my author friends and I had no choice but to speak up and defend the truth. All of the alleged overlaps were actually plot points that came from the original script of the show. When different fan fiction authors write stories based on the same source material, some overlap is inevitable. To use obvious examples, in Demigods and Semidevils, the beaming divine art is found at the bottom of a cliff. In Marvel, Iron Man gets trapped in a cave. You can't claim those original plot elements as exclusive to one fan fiction author. His color palette was refuted point by point. While preparing that rebuttal, my friends and I discovered something else. The Homelander author who accused me was himself committing plagiarism. Both an older and a newer book of his contained copied material. The older book recycled chapters from his previous title, My Superheroes Can't Be That Scummy, essentially reusing his own content to sell again, which violates the site rules and deceives readers. His new book, Gwen Spider, I'm from Prototype, contained material copied from another author, White Xantang's A Certain U.S. Marvel's Antihero. Because this created a greater disturbance, Chidian's staff investigated both parties. The result, both of his books were banned and taken down, while my book remains online. There are two specific false claims I want to clear up. First, he posted on Tiba that I was a little fairy who socializes well and had gathered a group of male authors to support me, trying to manufacture a gender conflict. I am a man, plain and simple. Second, he accused my friends and me of being a studio, implying we were protecting collective business interests and attacking him. That makes no sense. Who has ever heard of a studio that updates only 4,000 or 5,000 characters a day, barely meeting the minimum? No studio would hire such a writer. They'd go hungry. At first, I let him say what he wanted, thinking the truth would come out on its own. I was wrong to stay silent. My author friends were right to be angry that I didn't respond sooner. If not for their righteous and persistent defense, my reputation might well have been ruined. I'm very grateful to the fair and diligent Chidian officials, to my editor, and to my dear author friends who stood up for me. That's all. I hope this doesn't disturb your reading. Drip, drip, drip. Red and blue lights flashed, sirens keening as heavily armed riot police arrived within minutes from 3 blocks away. Quick, quick, up there! He knocked the others out and took Mr. Glenmorgan hostage. Is he waiting for us on purpose? Is he trying to provoke the police? The lead officer, followed by an assault team, hurried up the stairs, his face hard. Listen up. The man being held is Mr. Metropolis. Be careful. The scene is high profile. They reached the apartment to find chaos. Gang members sprawled across the floor, some thrown through doorways, others tangled in chandeliers. A broken window railing had pinned a couple of them in a ridiculous heap. Help! He's inside! One of the thugs cried, pointing toward the inner room like it was a lifeline. The officer's expression grew grimmer. He gave a hand signal, and his team formed up, moving to either side of the balcony door. He jumped from the 29th floor, faster than the wind, threw us around like toys. He even shot lasers from his eyes. At the sound of police, already a rare sight for these criminals, a few panicked and screamed. Be careful, that's not something we've seen before. Move, the officer barked, leading the charge into the room with his gun raised. Team members followed, faces set, submachine guns ready. Don't move, release the hostage and surrender. A cool night wind slipped through the open balcony, making the curtains billow. On the railing stood a young man in a plain blue t-shirt, steady as a statue. With one hand, he gripped a man by the waistband and lifted him as easily as if he were a feather. Mr. Glenmorgan? He asked calmly. Save me! Quickly! Save me! Glenmorgan shrieked, pale as the dizzying drop beneath them reduced the cars below to toy boxes. Once a small-time gang leader who rose to infamy and then reinvented himself as Metropolis's philanthropic tycoon, he had survived assassination attempts before. This wasn't an ordinary attacker, though. Bullets hadn't even grazed him. Put him down, you lunatic. The sight of someone balanced on a 29th floor railing, holding another man with one hand, stunned everyone. Of course, the young man said to the police. I'll put him down, on one condition. Even without seeing the muzzles aimed his way, the man could feel them. He smiled, steady. He confesses to his crimes and accepts justice. There's no special treatment for the rich under the law, he added, his tone quiet but hard. He toyed with the man for a moment, and Glenmorgan's fear only intensified. His pleading turned hysterical. Somebody save me. He's a monster. Put him down or we'll shoot, one of the officers warned. Think of your family. The young man's face hardened. Not long ago, he'd rescued a policewoman from bandits. Later, that witness had been abducted by helicopter from a courthouse roof. He tracked the case and, after days of surveillance, found that the mastermind behind it all was the philanthropic titan Glenmorgan. You had your chance, he said. With a casual motion, he flung Glenmorgan backward. The tycoon screamed and arced through the air, plummeting headfirst toward the asphalt dozens of meters below. The officer's eyes widened. Was this the same hero who'd never used excessive force? Ah! Glenn Morgan's heart hammered past 200 as he fell. The wind roared in his ears. For a terrifying second, he accepted his fate. 10 centimeters above the ground, a steel-hard arm shot out. The heavy inertia of the fall vanished without even making that arm tremble. The young man had already leaped down and now held Glenn Morgan upside down by one hand like a scrawny chicken. "How was the roller coaster?" he asked, casual as if offering another ride. "If you like, I can keep it going." Glenn Morgan collapsed to his knees when released, white-lipped, almost incontinent with fear. Clark, because it was him, threw the man to the pavement and towered over him, forcing out a confession. I was one of Metropolis's biggest gang leaders. I shot dozens of people personally. I bribed officials. I lied to everyone." Kneeling and trembling, the man spilled the truth about his crimes. Clark listened once, then allowed himself a nearly imperceptible nod. The Clark who had once tried only to reason had learned that some people don't respond to slow talk. Click, click. Porters beyond the police cordon snapped flash after flash, drawn like sharks to blood. Several cameras had already been trained on him since he'd arrived. "You know the rules. Metropolis," Clark said, pointing straight at Glenn Morgan as cameras recorded. "Treat the citizens of this city right, or I'll find you again." He didn't want his hometown, where he'd been raised, to slide into an abyss and become another Gotham. After speaking, he straightened, launched into the night with his red cape trailing, and was gone in an instant, his figure swallowed by the stars. One of the helicopter cameras had recorded the entire incident in high definition. Clark thought it might belong to a single station. Later, he would realize it was from Luther Group's network. That evening, when Clark got home, he paused with his hand on the doorknob, feeling a familiar, steady heartbeat inside the house. David had finally returned from a month away. Clark pushed the door open to find his younger brother laughing with their parents, eyes bright as he described an island that sounded like paradise. "You've adapted to life as a reporter's assistant, all right," David teased. Clark, wearing a suit and a pair of dark glasses, looked older, more settled. The family sat down to a warm dinner. Jonathan hugged both sons. Martha arranged the dishes with a gentle smile. The house felt full and ordinary in a way Clark had missed. With his elder son working and the younger often traveling, these small family moments had become precious. After the meal, David lingered upstairs on the attic landing and stared out at the night sky. "The telescope's gone," he said. That old telescope had once been Clark's, used to sneak peeks at Lana, and now the habit of watching was gone, along with the girl. Clark's voice was quiet. "Lana's gone, and I've changed." David's brow creased. A month had passed. With Clark's Kryptonian physiology, a simple eye injury should have long since healed if it were just physical. "Your eyes, are they better?" Clark looked away slightly, as if toward something only he could see. For most people, losing sight is devastating. For Clark, it was still a real loss, but one tangled with guilt. The Wishing Stone's prices always demanded something precious. Perhaps that was his, this blindness that both punished and comforted him, a constant reminder to be careful. "There's no improvement," he admitted. "It might be permanent." David's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't think that because your body is strong, you can be careless. You're walking on dangerous ground." "You smelled like gunpowder," David added, folding his hands in his pockets. "You were shot by several people. The wounds were bad enough to fell an elephant." Clark only shrugged. He didn't intend to hide the truth from his brother. "The meteorite, the thing that used to be my weakness, it's gone from this world. Their guns and cannons can't hurt me anymore." David shook his head. "Weakness gone doesn't mean invincible," he warned. He wanted Clark to stay cautious, not reckless. Far above the city, in Luthor Tower, Lex Luthor sat alone in the high-rise office, half his face shadowed by moonlight. He watched super-speed footage frame by frame, slowing it down 1,000 times without losing a single detail. He still couldn't account for the missing hours in his memory, or the absence of the wishing stone he had once possessed. He had woken with a mind sharpened for scientific genius, and with devastating news. His father, Lionel Luthor, had died in a car crash on the way home. Lex had rushed to the hospital only to find his father gone, a sheet covering a cold body. Behind his desk, the newly powerful head of the Luthor conglomerate felt a complicated storm of grief and anger. Was this the price of his wish,